who are watching on Rogers Television this evening as well. And this evening we have Emily Weir, who is an Eastwood Collegiate student, here to sing our national anthem. I would invite everyone who are able to stand, please.
Oh, Canada, our home and native land, true patriot love in all thy sons command. With glowing hearts we see thee rise, the true north strong and free. From far and wide, O Canada, we stand on guard for thee. God keep our land glorious and free. O Canada, we stand on guard for thee. O Canada, we stand on guard for thee.
Thank you very much, Emily. Well done. And I think the baby was in tune with you on a couple of those notes. It's been moved by Councillor Galloway-Seelock that the minutes of the regular meeting held March the 3rd, 2014, and special meetings held March 3rd, 17th, as mailed to the Mayor and Councillors be accepted. All in favour? Before we take that vote, Councillor Fernandez.
Yes, it was brought to my attention that the minutes were incorrect on page 43. They have been corrected on the website, but it was item number 6 on the sidewalk installation, Kennedy and Palmer Avenue. In the minutes, it stated that I had voted against Councillor Etherington's motion to delete the sidewalk construction, and in actuality, I had voted in favour of his motion. So I wanted to make sure that that was on a public record, as well as the fact that it had been changed, because I brought it to the attention.
That was brought to our attention, and it has been changed.
Okay,
good.
Thank you.
Just
a quick question. I was waiting for a response from the clerk with regard to, does that preclude any motion to reconsider? And my understanding that it does not. I could bring forward a motion to reconsider this issue regardless of how my vote happened. So I'll defer that until the item comes forward.
It doesn't matter. If we get to dealing with that, we'll come to the delegations.
Great.
The person bringing forward a motion for reconsideration, it doesn't matter which way they voted, if that's what your question was.
Great. Thanks.
Okay. Okay, there's one piece of communication, and that will be referred to file. Any declarations of pecuniary interest on tonight's agenda? Councillor Ioannidis.
Can you get back to me? I just want to look where the items are. Sorry.
All right, we'll come back to that item. We'll proceed to the delegations then. The item that Councillor Fernandez was just referring to has to deal with the sidewalk installation on Kennedy and Palmer Avenue in that area. And the normal procedure would be to have a motion for reconsideration prior to listening to delegations. However, it was the agreement of myself and the committee chairs at an agenda-setting meeting that we would allow one delegation to come forward at this point in time, because he had registered prior to tonight's event. There will be no discussion on that, so therefore no questions of the delegation at this point in time. Simply hear the presentation for 5 minutes, and then if there is someone that wishes to bring forward a notice for reconsideration, we would vote on that next, and it would take 2/3 majority of the members of council present, and that would be 8. in order to rehear it. Okay, I'm seeing that there are no declarations of pecuniary interest on tonight's agenda. So, Terry Ross, could you come forward, please?
Good evening, and thanks for allowing me to come back. We can make a difference this evening by attending the council meeting to show we exist. We stand up for ourselves and will not accept a decision that was imposed on us by the 5 councillors. I have asked the neighbours to join me to save our trees, to save our yards, to prevent unnecessary spending, and to prevent a loss of use that will affect our lifestyle. We are not children. We are residents of Kitchener who are here to be heard and respected. Last month, there was a group before council making recommendations on how to get people out to vote. And it was brought up by Councillor Fernandez that council not only needs to listen but to hear. Remember, 41 out of 44 residents stated they did not want the proposed sidewalks. 41 voters do not want the sidewalks. 41 people have paid taxes and taken care of these lands, have pride in their properties, and some have been here for more than 40 years in these locations. At the beginning of November, we, the residents of these 2 streets, received notice of infrastructure improvements. This is needed as the water and sewer services are from the 40s and 50s, and some of us have experienced failures in the systems. We are not in disagreement with this plan. The plan also mentions that they'll be installing sidewalks where there are none. This will occur on both even-numbered homes on Palmer and Kennedy. And what they have neglected to tell us is within these plans are the loss of all the old Ohio Buckeye trees down Kennedy. They've explained that they are not mature trees. There are also 7 mature trees on Palmer and 3 on Kennedy that are so close to the planned sidewalks that they most likely will show damage and even death in the upcoming years. They're also planning to install boulevards on both streets running between the road and the sidewalk, and this means to the homeowners on Palmer they will lose a great deal of the area that's used for parking, approximately 8 feet or more depending on the run of the existing roadway. For some, this means no room to park their second vehicle. And for the rentals on Kennedy, the loss will be approximately 50% of their parking. There are 3 areas on Palmer that have mature trees, and the sidewalk will be against the edge of the roadway. However, this still may be infringe on the ability to park a vehicle in the driveway and will affect the mature trees. As for Kennedy, we will lose a lot more area between the road and our homes. They are planning to physically move the roadway away from the odd number homes by 1 foot, and it will increase the size of their boulevard on their side of the street. The cable and phone box connections on the even-numbered side of the road will now be in the same line as the proposed sidewalk. The reason I was given for moving the road is because the hydro poles are too close to the road, and they will not move the poles even though they do not appear to be in good condition. Hydro has told me there are no rules for the distance from the street. They see no issue in their present locations. The addition of the sidewalks will give great stress to the elderly in our area with the requirement to remove the snow in front of their homes, and where do they put it? Their quality of life is now affected. Added stress and added costs because they'll have to pay to have the snow removed, and they have fear that if it's not done, they'll be fined. These people are on a fixed income, and I feel for these people, and I've listened to their concerns, and they should not be subject to this plan as they did not ask for it. I've been told the boulevard's needed for the piling of snow in the winter months, yet now when the plows go by, they're still 2 to 3 feet away from the edge of the roadway. Personally, I feel the remaining mature trees will be damaged. It will be evident in the next 2 to 3 years, and it will have a negative impact on our property values. Further, the values of our homes may decrease as a result of losing the grass frontage and the present parking areas, as well as losing the canopy that protects the yards and contributes to our air supply. It's been mentioned that Maple Leaf property may be developed, and they need access to the Iron Horse Trail. Well, these future people can walk down Cortland to find the trail that will take them to Victoria Park. They can walk down the present walkway on Palmer or Kent to do the same trail to the east that ends within 2 blocks. And to cross Cortland at the new proposed sidewalk will be very dangerous because it's not on the crest of the hill. We are not in a high-traffic area. The streets are short. Palmer even has a dead end, and it's to be redesigned as a turnaround for the snowplows. We may not have the incomes of the large homes of well-known people living on the streets, but we are people who are voicing our concerns to be heard, just like the residents of Glasgow Street. It's my understanding that no sidewalks will be installed because of the risk of golf balls and the loss of trees, saving the city $100,000. As example, the end of Water Street at Victoria Park, it has no sidewalks that connect to the park. Why? The sidewalks may damage the mature trees that are owned by the city. These are two examples that reflect a perceived double standard between city-owned property and upscale neighborhood. The majority of residents have 2 or more vehicles we use daily because of the distance we go to work or school.
That's 5 minutes. Are you just about done?
Almost done, sir.
Okay, go ahead.
Thank you. The majority of residents have 2 or more vehicles that we use daily because of the distance we go to work or school. There are many of us who have bicycles and e-bikes that we ride on the roadway and not the sidewalks when the weather allows, and we are doing our part to reduce the carbon footprint, but we are about to be punished. Recently, one of our daughters, when her family were going to stay over, we have 3 vehicles, 2 e-bikes and 3 bicycles. Which each of the 3 vehicles parked bump to bumper, the tail end of my truck would be over the proposed sidewalk. There's no room for guests. And to park on the road would make the roadway more hazardous by distractions. The risk of someone crossing the other side from between more parked cars that could be in a driveway. Chaos is going to be created if the plan goes through.
If you could wrap up now, Mr. Ross.
If you have not been on our streets, you should come by. It's quiet and friendly, a place when we know our neighbors' names. We help each other, we lend a hand, and we trust each other. And I would like to thank the councillors from other wards who have made the effort to come out to our area and can confirm the lack of traffic and how safe it is.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Ross. You can take your seat. Okay, there is, I have in my front of me at least, a written copy of a motion for reconsideration. It is from Councillor Etherington, and I think we'll just read the operative clauses there. The whereases for motion for reconsideration are not as critical. Councillor Etherington, you wish to read the operative clause?
Yeah, through you, Mr. Mayor. We're not going to have any questions of Mr. Ross.
We're not having there's no discussion of an item until it is agreed that there will be reconsideration. That was also on the printed agenda that went out as well.
Okay. Well, this motion for reconsideration, it would read, whereas the issue of installing a sidewalk as part of the Kennedy and Palmer Avenue reconstruction project, as outlined in Infrastructure Services Department report INS 14030, was dealt with at the March 3, 2014 council meeting to give residents an opportunity to provide feedback. And whereas 41 of 44 residents signed a petition saying they're opposed to installing the sidewalks, and whereas homeowners are unhappy with a situation where 2 councillors were absent from the 5-4 vote on March 3 that recommended installing sidewalks against the wishes of residents, and whereas the installation of sidewalks will leave rental units short of Kitchener's legal requirement for parking spaces, and whereas homeowners have asked that the subject be reconsidered by council, be it resolved that council agree to reconsider the issue of installing sidewalks on Kennedy and Palmer.
Is there a seconder? Councillor Fernandez? Okay, there's no debate on reconsideration. So we'll call for the vote on the reconsideration. As I've said before, it will require 2/3 majority of those of us who are present. Therefore, it is 8. Those recorded vote has been called for. The motion for reconsideration is lost, 6-5. Therefore, the topic will not be discussed again this evening, and the original ruling of the previous council meeting stands. And just for your information, there were 4 other delegations, 3 from the neighborhood and 1 person from Tri-Cities Transportation Act from TriTag. So, you clear on what has transpired? The motion, I'll summarize it once more. The motion for reconsideration of the item that was dealt with on a previous council meeting had to pass by a majority with 8 in favor of reconsideration. There were only 5 in favor of reconsideration. Therefore, the item will not be dealt with again. It will not be dealt with. And there will be no further discussion on the matter this evening. There were no other delegations listed or in the registered this evening. So we'll proceed to the tenders. Someone prepared to move the tenders? Councillor Ioannidis, seconded by Councillor Davey. And there are a number, so in order to have some organization on them, we will deal with them in their order. The trenchless water main rehabilitation. Any questions? Seeing none, we'll move on. Consultant services for the geotechnical investigation. Councillor Fernandez.
Thank you. I just wanted to refer to an email I received from Mr. Gordon. I believe this was the one I sent you an email on. Was it not? I sent a number of emails because I wanted to have the answers before tonight. One of the things I needed to understand was, because this seems to be for a number of different projects, how many projects is this expected to cover off? I don't know if I asked you that as part of that question, and I apologize if I didn't.
Mr. Gordon, are you able to help us?
Yes, through you, Mr. Mayor. I'll have to get you the number of those projects. I don't have that just at the top of my mind.
Okay. And I think I was asking you regarding the... no, this was something else, I believe. Was it not? I asked you about what the cost was previously.
Yes, that was...
We've done this in the past, right? This geotechnical?
Yes, we do this geotechnical each year.
Each year.
And it's based on the number of roads that are coming forward in the program.
Okay, all right. So if I can understand what those numbers are, that I think will help us, or at least help me understand. What was the price again last year?
Last year's price was $130,000, and this year's work is being done for 2016, and the number of projects is double what the past one was.
Okay, thank you very much.
We'll move on to the next tender, which is the consultant services for the EA. This is Fairway Road. The Idlewood Creek. Seeing none, we'll move on. Sterling Avenue Bridge. Let's see. Yes, do. Councillor Glenn Graham.
Thank you very much. I'd just like to know about the testing for this in terms of the rationale. Was there a business case built on simply the fact that it's age, or has there been some non-destructive testing or some other forms of testing involved?
Who would be able to answer that? Ms. Houston?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I understand from engineering staff that this is based on inspection reports from 2010 and previous. The recommendations were developed for rehabilitation of the structure to avoid any escalated deterioration and to maintain the bridge. Now, whether that inspection process included physical taking apart, I don't know that answer.
Thank you. The next question is, about the fact that I've seen the plans for the Weber Street and King Street bridges, and there's opportunities for stamps or community input, QR codes, or that kind of thing that could actually mark a little bit of the history. And it might be an opportunity for a little bit of a community input in the way of some kind of imprint into the project. Has that been considered, or would there be a further opportunity down the line for that?
Ms. Houston, are you familiar with what's being asked?
I'm afraid I'm not familiar with what you're asking. We can certainly take that back for consideration.
Sure, and I'll talk to the Councillor Etherington about that since it's his ward, and perhaps just float that with you.
Okay.
Thanks.
Okay, we'll move on to the closed-circuit TV inspection. Councillor Fernandez.
Yes, this was a similar question I had asked, and actually, Mr. Gordon, you hadn't answered on what the cost of this one was previously. This is something we do every year, but I just wanted to understand the difference in the cost from the previous years.
Mr. Gordon.
Through you, Mr. Mayor, the cost has increased by 24% over the previous contract.
Okay. And do we have any understanding why?
Sorry,
I'd have to get back to you on that, but I believe that was the amount of work that is being done.
I think Ms. Houston has an answer.
Through you, Mr. Mayor, I guess there's a couple of reasons why the pricing has increased. One, there's some limited competition here. These are really the only two competitors in the market. And secondly, there would be increased in staff costs and also in dumping costs. But in terms of the quantity, my understanding is the quantity is similar to last year, and it was all in the unit pricing that impacted the overall bid.
Okay, because I remember us having the same company doing it last year, if I'm not mistaken. Is that correct? Was it the same company? Yeah, it was Badger. Yeah, that's what I thought. I guess what I'm concerned about is if we're seeing an increase in the pricing, is it something that since we're doing it every year, should we be maybe looking at a longer contract and maybe locking in for 2 years and seeing if we can get a better price? Has that ever been considered?
Ms. Houston?
That is certainly something we can consider for a future tender. Yeah, we'll take that under advisement.
Yeah, since we've had the same company, maybe they'll give us a more bang for our buck kind of thing. Okay, thank you.
Okay, the next tender is the road and surface construction. This is for quite a variety of streets. Don't see any questions there. Road seal resurfacing. All right, press your button, please. Okay, back to closed circuit.
I beg your pardon. Councillor Gazzola has brought up good questions in the past about just checking for water leakage, and I was wondering if this would help us to look to see if there's any kind of cracks in the system. Would this help us with that?
Ms. Houston.
In this particular case, it relates to sewers, but the CCTV inspection, that's the whole purpose of doing that kind of inspection, and it's also done on water mains as well.
Okay, so this is transferable to those other water mains?
Yes, it is.
Okay, perfect. Thank you.
Okay, moving on then. This is road seal resurfacing. Don't see any there. Cured in place sanitary sewer lining. Don't see any there either. The next item is the road reconstruction for a variety of streets. Councillor Gazzola.
I don't have any questions. I haven't had any questions on any of these. I just wanted to point out, I've been harping at this for I don't know how many years, that we seem to have more funds available in our accounts than I've felt that we need to have, and therefore we're really overcharging people. But there are about 7 or 8 projects here. I think almost every one of them has surplus money in their accounts, the total of them total to $1.6 million of extra funds that are sitting there. Something that I've been harping about for many years and will continue to do so. Thank you.
I think Ms. Houston has perhaps an explanation. I don't know. Ms. Houston?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I just wanted to point out that one of the advantages we have of going to tender early in the season is we do get better pricing. On the King Edward School, which is one of the examples that has some of the larger surplus tonight, you can see that some of the bids are actually in the range that we had for our budget. So we did get some very competitive bid prices on this particular one. We can't always count on that happening, so we have to develop our budgets accordingly.
Councillor Fernandez.
Yeah, I had a meeting earlier in the year with some of engineering staff, and this was one of the projects that they had alluded to with regard to how they are trying to compile a bunch of streets being done together. So I'm glad to see that we're taking advantage of doing a lot more work in a time frame. The only concern I have is of course the impact on all of those adjoining streets and abutting streets in terms of people being able to access driveways, emergency vehicles being able to get into the area. So especially because it's saying it's being done in 2 phases. How are those phases decided? And how to, and actually that's more of a question for you, Ms. Houston, than it is for Mr. Gordon. I apologize.
Ms. Houston?
I can't comment tonight in terms of how the phasing was decided. I know there was extensive consultation with the neighborhood to make sure the concerns around access were addressed. So that was certainly taken into consideration, but the details around the phasing I would have to get back to you on. Okay.
Yeah, I would appreciate hearing that. I mean, interesting enough, the beginning of the week, last week, I think Gary Doyle had a big thing that, construction season has started, everybody be prepared. And this is a perfect example of, an area that is going to be sort of locked down, for example, under construction for a good long period of time. So I just appreciate understanding how they're going to do that. Thank you.
Okay, that was the last of the tenders. I'll call for the vote. Those in favor? Opposed? That's carried. Now proceed to the committee recommendations. Community Infrastructure Services first. Councillor Ioannidis, you're not reading the reports, you're just entering the full package. But there were a couple that were
okay.
For March 31st.
I'll just number them. Okay. Moved by myself and seconded by Councillor Frank Etherington that items in the Community Infrastructure Service Committee recommends the following items through 1 through items 10 be approved.
With the exception of items 5 and 8, that are part of 8, that were referred to this meeting. So I think we'll deal with the exceptions first, and then go to the balance of the report.
Okay, want me to read item 5?
So item 5, this has to do with the parking on Pandora Crescent. There was a additional report that was given to us. Staff wish to refer to a comment on the report? Or no? Okay. So it was referred for additional information. You have the report in front of you now? Okay. So presumably in your motion then you would be moving the original recommendation?
Yes.
Okay. Let's deal with that item alone then. We're going to be dealing with the exceptions first. This is Pandora Crescent and the parking restrictions. Everyone on the same page with me? It's what was recommended before. Okay. All right. Those in favor? Opposed? That's carried. Now deal with the other exceptions, and they had to do with grants. This is item number 8. But we'll move first of all to 8E, which is the grant for 12 Angry Filmmakers, Tier 2 grant. And the recommendation, actually, I've forgotten what the recommendation was on that one. Can someone help me on it? Thank you. Oh, yes, there it is. That the recommendation is that the not be approved. Okay. Is that Councillor Ioannidis? We're dealing with...
I thought we were dealing with the new recommendation here.
That's correct.
Yeah.
And that is that it not be approved. Okay.
Yes.
All right. So, be clear, this is the second recommendation on the separate report that was given to us. It's part of the agenda package. The recommendation is to not approve the grant for 12 Angry Filmmakers. Those in favor of not approval, hold your hands, please. Those opposed? And I'm in favor of the recommendation, which is not approval. So that is declined. The third item, the third paragraph, is for the G33K Art Show. Geek, you're right. I forgot about that. It makes sense. Geek. The Geek Art Show. That makes perfect sense. That's in an amount of $1,000 be approved as a cash grant. Those in favor? Opposed? That's carried. But I wasn't watching my screen here, and I have two people on the screen where they speak to. It was Councillor Rabanovich and Mr. Regier. Okay? And, okay. All right. So that was carried. The final one on that recommendation is for Neruda. It's in the amount of $8,000 be approved as a cash grant to Neruda Arts, which was the original recommendation, if I recall correctly. And Councillor Rabanovich, you wish to speak to that?
Yes. So do we have we don't have a motion on the table at this point, Mr. Mayor?
They were part of the original motion that I took from Councillor Ioannidis, which included these.
Okay. Well, then so are you looking for an amendment to the amount, if that's what we want to do, or how do you want us to handle that?
The normal process here, there's a motion on the floor. We'll deal with amendments, or we'll take the vote.
Okay. Well, then I will, Mr. Mayor, I will move an amendment to the same amount of grant that they received last year with respect to Neruda. I think it's Neruda's done a strong job of raising the quality and the quantity of these types of events in our community. We often speak about enhancing the quality of life in our community, the importance that festivals play to building strong neighborhoods, to improving our economic development initiatives in the city, and so on. And I think to see an organization that has made significant progress, and one that, quite frankly, the provincial government is recognizing as well as important to support. I think it's incumbent on us to support them in a similar manner. I understand that we may not be in a position to grant them additional dollars over and above that as they requested. However, I think to see us go backwards from where they were last year would certainly be a step in the wrong direction in terms of what we often speak of that we're trying to achieve in our community.
Okay, so your recommendation is then for, instead of 8,000, it is 12, I think. Is that correct? 15? $11 cash, 4 in kind. 11 and 4 for a total of 15. That's correct. So that is the amendment. to the motion that is on the floor. For in essence, it's 15,000 instead of the 8. Are we clear on that? Is there a seconder for that amendment? Councillor Gazzola? And I have several people wish to speak to it. Councillor Glenn Graham.
Thanks. I will support this. I think that Neruda has earned the respect of the community. They've demonstrated great value. They've also shown us that this is a representation of the diversity in our community. They're the equivalent of the Blues Fest starting out in the sense that they have created critical mass of support behind this. And there's talk last time about a precedent being set for this going into the permanent grants. And I think that we should set a precedent that this does deserve permanent support, at least to this level, if not beyond. So I will fully support this motion.
Councillor Etherington.
Yeah, through you, Mr. Chair, I just want to repeat what Councillor Glenn Graham and Councillor Verbanovic have already said. I'll be supporting an increased amount to Neruda. They've always won my respect in the city. We make a lot of noise about Neruda doing more in Waterloo than Kitchener. If we want to change that around, we don't do it by reducing their grants. I think we should give them all the support we can and encourage them even further to locate their events more in our city, as well as Waterloo. Thank you.
Okay, I have 4 more speakers, but just before I go to them, and I'm going to come back to Mr. Chapman or Mr. May afterwards. I'm not sure who it would be. Part of the recommendation, if we were going over the amount allocated, council needed to give direction as to how that was going to be funded. And so if you'd be prepared to speak to that at the end, before we take the vote. Councillor Galloway-Seelock.
Yeah, I agree with some of what's being said. Neruda does fabulous work in our community, but if I recall correctly, last year they came to us and asked for an increased amount because they were doing a one-time event. It was some sort of special event last year, and so we gave them the money based on that. And so if we give them money for a one-time event, it shouldn't mean that we have to give them that same amount the following year. So I appreciate all the work and the hard work that Neruda does and what they bring to our community. But we also have to remember that we have a committee of people who sit down and look through all of our grant reviews, grant applications, and they review it and give us recommendations on what each group should get. And I think based on that, I'm not willing to support the increase. I'm definitely willing to support the 8,000 that came forward from the committee to recommend. But if someone wants to tell me otherwise, I'm fairly certain that Neruda came forward last year. I can't remember the event. I was trying to flip through their application to see if I could find it. But they were running something special last year. That's why we gave them more money than we have in the past. So I will not be supporting the increased, or the amendment for the increased amount, but rather the staff recommendation.
Councillor Davey.
Thank you, and Councillor Galloway-Seelock pretty much hit the nail on the head, I think, with respect to why there was a larger increase last year. And my question was asked by Mayor Zares, so we will be hearing from staff, I suppose, or the mover as to where this extra $7,000 will be coming from. So in comment, I would say only that I have concern about when we start tweaking the amounts, because I think the role of this council, from my vantage, since we do have a committee that does all the work, is if there was a flaw in the process, if for some reason the committee erred in not having a higher dollar figure here, then we need to fix that process as opposed to picking out individual groups that we think, without having the full breadth of rationale, deserve more money. So I will not be supporting the increase. I respect the work that Neruda does, and the fact that we're giving them $2,000 more than the City of Waterloo, for example, when my understanding is they do at least as much work in Waterloo, I think is entirely appropriate.
Councillor Fernandez.
Thank you. I guess my question goes to what you were going to ask Mr. May and Mr. Chapman to speak to, is where would the additional funds come from? So do you want me to ask the question? Because we haven't done questions yet.
No.
We'll ask the question now, and then we'll have a better idea.
Mr. May actually had clicked in, so we'll go to him for that answer.
So through you, Mr. Mayor, there is no no extra amount of funding within the Tier 2 budget. So what would happen, unless council is to direct staff specifically tonight to the source of funding for this increase, it would be an over expenditure within the grant funding. The other point that I raised at committee that I'll repeat tonight is that Neruda is eligible to become Tier 1. And I expect that a challenge we will have later this year will be that Neruda, rightly or wrongly, will expect to go to Tier 1 at this elevated amount. That won't be staff's position, but we'll be back to you, because if Neruda moves to Tier 1 on this elevated grant amount, it will basically mean less money for Tier 2 groups in the future.
Okay, so if they didn't get the elevated amount, would they still be considered as or come to us as a Tier 1?
Yes, so they meet the requirements for to become Tier 1. The question really is, when we move a group to Tier 1, we set that allocation. It's staff's view that we would set the Tier 1 grant for Neruda closer to what staff has recommended. I suspect that should you approve this increased allocation, Neruda would be expecting something closer to that, and we'll be back in front of you with staff having a proposal and Neruda making the case as to why her Tier 1 grant should be higher.
Okay. And I guess then, Mr. Chapman, is there any resources that we would be able to transfer? I know that we were talking about, robbing a little bit out of economic development, and there was some conversation about that the last time. I don't know where that. We haven't had any additional information with regard to that, so I don't know if I should be asking Mr. Regier or Mr. Chapman about that.
There was something in the report. I can't.
I apologize if I didn't see that.
All of that. Mr. Regier, would you wish to speak to that? Sure. Oh, hang on a second. I've got to take somebody off.
Take me off.
Yeah. Okay, now Mr. Regier.
No problem. Thank you, Mayor Zare. So we went back to the special events budget, and the budget has been fully allocated to the existing events portfolio. So I had misspoken when I discussed this as an option at the last meeting.
Okay. Thanks for that clarification.
Councillor Gazzola.
I spoke at considerable length to this 2 weeks ago when it was discussed here at Council, and my opinions are somewhat different than several members of Council around the table. As far as this organization is concerned, I really believe that they've done an excellent job for our community. They are, what the recommendation here is that they get the same amount as they received last year. It's not an increase. They had asked for an increase, and might likely be, a reasonable request. But what the compromise position here is that we're going to recommend to give them the same as last year. Now, when I spoke last week too, and I do want to emphasize this, that I am really pleased with the committee that we have set up that reviews these things. There are a number of staff people also on that committee, and they do an excellent job. And there's been a big improvement over the years. But the important thing is that we're still here and we still have to make decisions, and the buck stops with council. The committee and staff have done the job professionally that they should be doing, and I appreciate that. And there are times when we have to say to staff and to our committees, thank you very much, but the buck stops with us, and we have to make a decision. So I'm really I'm prepared to support this. I know there seems to be a lot of concern as to where we're going to find, $7,000. Last year, at the drop of a hat, we found the money to rebuild a bridge to the tune of $10 million. I mentioned earlier tonight there's a lot of accounts. I mentioned 7 accounts out of I don't know how many accounts. I think if we really, really look hard, we can find that money, and I don't think our community will be bankrupt at the end of the day. Another point that has come to me, and I've talking with some people in the arts and culture community, is this whole secret music fest that's coming forward, that Neruda and the Blues Festival, a lot of these other organizations had no idea of, have no idea what impact that might have on their organizations and their functions. And this is something that's been thrown out, and we have to deal with it. So that's just another added factor that I think it warrants that this organization get at least the same amount of money as they received last year's. So I will be supporting it, and I'd ask for a recorded vote when the time comes.
Councillor Yanetsky.
Thank you. I've mulled this over in consideration of the process, and when we went through this back last fall, they filed their applications just like every other group, and they were considered by the review committee, and they provided with a recommendation, and amount of money was set aside through the budget process, which was adhered to. And now we have them coming, and as mentioned by staff and a few others, we're scrounging around trying to find some extra cash. I know we're not talking huge sums of money, but still there's the principle of going through the process that we did through back in the fall and through the budget process. I'm prepared to agree with the amount of $8,000, which was initially recommended, and I know Narandu Arts do a good job, but it's the process that has been not followed that has been set up. So I'm not prepared to support the increase, but I'm prepared to support the 8,000 initial grant request.
Okay. Closing off debate on this amendment. Councillor Vrbanovich.
Thanks. Just one question of staff, if I may, first, Mr. Mayor. And this is one of the things that admittedly was a little thin in staff's report in light of the kinds of questions I recall asking at committee, which was around how special events funds these kinds of things, what their budgets are, and how we can manage it. And all that we got back information-wise is it's totally taken, all the money spent, and we can't do it, which wasn't certainly the scope of the answer that I was hoping for. So I guess my question directly to you, Mr. Regier, and I want to be clear, I'm a huge proponent of the investments that need to be made in the downtown and in our neighborhoods for special events. But my question to you is, what is the overall operating and capital budget of special events?
Mr. Regier.
I'll bring Jeff Young down to answer that question.
Mr. Young.
Through you, Mr. Mayor. Our operating budget is approximately $190,000 for events. Our capital budgets are split between City Hall, events in Victoria Park Pavilion, which are in the neighborhood of, I believe, $40,000, $30,000 per year.
So your entire special events budget is $190,000? Or that's the part that doesn't involve staff?
Correct. That's the part that does not involve staff.
Okay. So that what comes out of that $190,000?
That would be the funding for events. So everything from Cruising on King, Kids Park, New Year's Eve, the whole portfolio of events that we support throughout the year.
Okay, and is there a business development component in that budget? In your special events budget that Mr. Regier talked about last week? Mr. Regier, maybe?
I think that's probably something Mr. Regier should be answering, not Mr. Young.
Yeah, that was the point upon which I was mistaken. I had the impression that we had a small fund that was designed to support innovation in special events. I was incorrect on that matter. This particular year, we've got all of the the programming budget, the $190,000 that Mr. Young has referred to, allocated for specific events in the portfolio.
Okay. And so some of it is going towards other new business development?
Correct, it would be. What we typically do with an event, if it's a newer event, is we will talk with the event organizer. We'll support it for a few years with the idea that those funds are not going to continue on past a number of years. This is the model that was used for example, RibFest years ago, where there's sort of some special event seed money, if you like to call that, or event development. That figure would decrease over the years until that event was able to be sustainable on its own and be able to generate the revenues, whether it's through sponsorship, ticket sales, vendor fees, etc.
Okay, so my last question then would be to Mr. Chapman. There's two sources of, if you're looking for direction with respect to how to fund this, there's two sources that would potentially come to mind for me. One is that we know there is a economic development capital account that still has significant funds in it that could potentially be used for this purpose, or an over expenditure on this budget line. What would staff's preference be on dealing with this?
Mr. Chapman.
Through the chair, to be honest, I don't have a preference. Ultimately, I see this variance as not a material variance, which is why I think it's reasonable that if council sees fit to support it, it'd be absorbed as an operating budget variance for the year and becomes a budget issue for 2015.
Okay. Then that's, Mr. Mayor, just to answer the clarification to that question, then that would be the direction that I'm proposing in the intent of my motion. And
that would probably be best to put that directly into the motion then.
Okay, that's what I'm asking.
Okay.
Yep. And just in closing, I understand that all the arguments on both sides of this issue, and like Councillor Gazzola, I also have great respect for the people on the review committee and the many staff hours that have gone into this. But fundamentally, if there is an appeal process, it's incumbent on us to hear what the various issues are and to make decisions. And in this particular instance, I look at the value that we get for the investment, and as I've said many, many times, huge respect for everything that we do in special events, but we couldn't do it without community groups that do this kind of thing and make the kinds of investment that they do. So I certainly hope that we have the votes around the horseshoe to support this this evening, and we'll see where it goes.
Okay, the motion is for instead of 8,000, it is 15,000, with the amount that would put the Tier 2 grants over will be an over expenditure. Not sure, it won't be exactly that amount because there was some other odd amount left over in the fund. So, is everyone clear on the question? Okay, and we're dealing with this as an amendment to the amount. No one's. That's what I was waiting for. Oh, did you ask? I missed that. Okay, that's why I was pausing. I was waiting for someone to say it. Okay, recorded vote has been called for. That's correct. A yes means it is the larger amount of $15,000. The motion carries. Okay. So the balance of the report then, this is the balance of the Community Services report. Those in favor? Opposed? That's carried. Planning and Strategic Initiatives. Councillor Urbanovich.
Mayor, and there are 3 items in the report, moved by myself, seconded by Councillor Galloway Seelock.
Any questions? Voting on number 2 separately. Okay, items 1 and 3. Those in favor? Opposed? That's carried. Item number 2, and this had to do with the zone change, I think. Yes, at 820 Victoria Street. Recorded vote's been called for on item number 2 of PSI. Yes. Okay, you may now vote. And that vote carries. Okay, the heritage. Oh, yes, we forgot about that, didn't we? So the vote was taken on the recorded basis for the benefit of television audience and those watching on the net. We will vote those in favor, standing vote. Those opposed. That motion carries. Heritage Kitchener report. Councillor Etherington.
Just one item, Mr. Mayor, that pursuant to Section 42 of the Ontario Heritage Act, Heritage Permit Application HPA 2014 V001 be approved to permit the demolition and construction of a front porch and rear yard addition at the property municipally addressed as 68 Schneider Avenue in accordance with the supporting information submitted with the application.
Those in favor? Opposed? That's carried. Now go to unfinished business. We have a couple of new items, but first of all, unfinished. Okay, seeing none, we'll go to the item. Is this under? Not under unfinished, so it's underneath. Okay. All right, we're dealing with item 9A, which is the special events planning. And Councillor Singh, you have a notice of motion here. Okay. Councillor Singh.
Yes, there's some clarity to the resolution that'll be up on display.
Is that the handwritten?
That's correct, yes.
Okay. While I was just going up there, I was just informed that on the Rogers Television, the vote is shown, but not on the webcast at this point. Okay. Yes, we are.
Okay, so the motion as written is, whereas the special events section of economic development work to attract and facilitate events to the City of Kitchener, and whereas numerous city recreational parks and facilities may be leased for various type of events, and whereas large events attracting high attendance have the greater economic benefit to the community, but may also be disruptive to the surrounding neighborhoods, and whereas the City of Kitchener and its residents place high priority on their quality of life, requiring consideration to be given to resident concerns. And whereas in planning a big music festival, neighborhood consultation was not a required process, resulting in numerous concerns being expressed by area residents. So the revised resolution is, therefore, be it resolved that staff develop guidelines for large-scale community events which may take place at city-owned or other private outdoor facilities. And further, be it resolved that public information session be required for informing residents when a new events are being introduced into a neighborhood, outlining only the general nature of the event, expected impacts, and projected attendance. Finally, be it resolved that there also be a mechanism to address any concerns both during and after such a new event.
So the difference from the printed motion is that the first operative clause has been changed a bit to set up the guidelines. Is that correct? That's the only change? Okay. Speaking to the revised motion that is in front of us now, Councillor Urbanovich.
Oh, okay. I had my light on for the next one, but just very briefly, I will certainly support this motion. I think when we're talking about this new festival, I do appreciate that there was a balance of issues that needed to be considered by staff in dealing with this issue. I think that there's a lot to be learned from this process, particularly as it relates to dealing with neighborhoods and making sure that as we introduce more events to neighborhoods, we give them the opportunity to be as successful as possible. What's being proposed specifically with respect to the event that has brought this about is really not different than the kinds of things we've seen with special events regularly in Victoria Park, that we've seen out at Chicopee Ski Hill on non-city property and at Binghamton's on non-city property, and up at Kiwanis Park in the past on city property. But what I think this motion does is say it's time for us, because we are a growing city, we're going to see more of this kind of thing. It's time for us to develop a more comprehensive guidelines and policy around it and make sure that there's an opportunity for neighborhood issues to be dealt with both before and after the event. So I'm pleased that Councillor Singh has brought this forward, and I will be supporting it.
This is a very popular topic. Councillor Etherington.
Was that me, Mr. Mayor? I missed your name. I had a few questions on this. Could I just ask a few questions before?
Absolutely.
My first question, and I'm speaking as a councillor where...
But this to the motion, not to the festival that is being discussed. I think that was about to be raised later. This is to the motion that we're dealing with here.
Okay, my questions had to do with the actual concert.
I think that was going to be raised later under new business.
Okay.
Correct? Councillor Gazzola, you had said you were going to raise a question, so I was looking. Okay, so there are a number of people who are going to speak to that matter. So just to the motion that's in front of us.
Yeah, as to the motion, I just had one thing to say in light of the fact that there was a substantial change made this year to the Blues Festival in Victoria Park, which parallels this and upset a number of people. So I had an amendment that I wanted to be considered to Councillor Singh's amended motion, which I can circulate now.
All right. It has to be in writing.
It is.
Okay.
And that's all, Mr. Mayor.
You don't wish to speak to it?
Sorry, I thought I just did. The whole reason for this is because of something I ran into in regards to the Blues Festival in Victoria Park, where the hours of the tent which functions in Victoria Park, the hours of the concert were extended, but people in the area did not know about that extension, which they're not happy about, until after the names of performers had been booked.
Okay, the words, trying to just see the amendment that you're making. So what words have you added here?
Well, the way that I've added, I said the final paragraph of Councillor Singh's resolution, be it finally resolved that, comma, unless there are changes affecting the time length, content, location, or noise level, comma, the public information session shall not be required if the city park or facility has previously been used for a similar event. So there's, between two commas, there's a change introduced there. In other words, that with an existing concert or an existing festival, if there are changes, then we hold the same procedure as Councillor Singh is suggesting with future concerts.
Okay, is everyone clear on that? The added words were right between the commas. Content, location, or noise level. Okay, when we come to moving these, we will deal with them separately. Councillor Singh.
I can speak to it finally, or I can make my comments now. Are there other speakers still, or ahead of me?
They've got
so I've got
six more speakers.
I can speak to it in the end.
Pardon me?
I can speak to it in the end.
Okay, we'll wait. Councillor Galloway-Sealock.
Yeah, I have, I think, a couple questions, probably of staff, I'm assuming. Just with regards to, it's suggesting here that we develop guidelines for large-scale community events on other private outdoor facilities. Do we have the ability to do that?
Mr. Wilmer.
I would suggest that under current regulations we do not. The only way we could do that is if we were to attempt to license those on private property.
Okay, because my concern, like I'm just going to use Binghamton's as an example. They have concerts there usually once a summer, and I can't imagine that we would have the ability to develop guidelines that anyone would have to follow. So I'm concerned with that part of the motion. I guess my other question may be more of for Councillor Singh and his intent with regards to the city-owned facilities. Are you talking all city facilities or just outdoor facilities? Because my concern, I'll tell you where I'm coming from. My concern is, are we going to start worrying about things that are happening at the auditorium when we have large concerts there, or is this just outdoor facilities?
Councillor Singh, you want to answer that specific question?
Yes, thank you. And to answer your question, Councillor Galloway-Sealock, it's to do with indoor and outdoor. Obviously, the impact can be various depending on the size of the event, even if it be indoor. But my motion speaks to informing residents when new events are being introduced. So obviously, the ODD has a built-in capacity as to what it can handle. So further dialogue there may not be necessary, whereas new venues which have not had large-scale events in them previously should require a certain level of public engagement.
Okay, with that, then I would suggest there probably needs to be I don't know what it would be, but a change of wording to suggest that, or at least meet that intent, because the auditorium has new events coming there every year, every month, basically, different type in nature. So I just don't want to start...
No, in working with Councillor...
I believe I have the floor at the time, so I just want to make sure that we're clear that we are not... setting guidelines and putting more regulations in place than need to. I understand with what's happening with this music festival and the want and the need to have that engagement for the public. So I'm supportive of that. I just don't want to start restricting ourselves and having all kinds of public meetings when we really just want to look at specific ones. So I'm just concerned with the generality of this motion. So if we can make sure that the intent to set guidelines more on the outdoor facilities or new in the nature, then I'm supportive of that. But I do also caution that it could hamper our ability to attract some events if we have too many guidelines and restrictions in place in the long run. So the general intent I can support, but I think there still needs to be some understanding of where exactly this is going to go.
Mr. Mayor, sorry, my interruption, and I apologize for that. I thought you were finished at that point. Councillor Galloway-Sealock was that Councillor Etherington's motion may speak to that unless there are changes affecting the time. So, but I guess more clarity can be added if I can try to think of something.
Mr. Regier, you have your light on. Is there something you want to add at this point would be good?
Yeah, through you, Mayor Zare, I just had perhaps a question of clarification for Councillor Etherington, and that was around the term content in the resolution. And the reason why I ask that is that as as we know, these events evolve over time and are adjusted from time to time in terms of the content that they engage in, the particular acts, the nature of the entertainment, and so on. And my suggestion would be that by putting that word in there, you would tend to shackle the event planners considerably to fine-tune the nature of the event as it's unfolding. So I just issue a word of caution here on that particular term.
Okay, we'll come. I have some thoughts on that as well, but we'll go through the list. Councillor Gazzola.
Yeah, I don't have a great deal to say about the resolution that's before us. I suppose I can support it. To me, it's just common sense. If what we're doing is we're saying we're going to be more transparent, or we're going to be transparent, and we're going to engage the public when we have some big outdoor different types of concerts coming to us. I'd like to ask, and I know there were some members of council that knew about this back last January, perhaps even earlier. I mean, this kind of a resolution should have been, if it's of a big concern, should have been coming out at that time, not now. The horses out of the barn, gone all through the fields. It's a little late now.
Okay, we're talking to the policy. We're not going to be talking about just because I had cut off Councillor Etherington earlier in terms of not talking about the concert which is now planned. We're talking strictly about the policy here.
Well, the policy is saying we're going to let people know what's coming off. I think right now, all of a sudden, we're scurrying all over the place and bringing in all sorts of things that, have we really had enough opportunity to deal with this? I mean, the policy from square one should be that we let the people know what's coming off. We should let members of council know what's coming off. So as far as this common sense thing, and yes, we're going to be a little more proactive in bringing this forward. Yes, it's hard not to support that recommendation. I do want to get a chance sometime to talk about what's happened and who's accountable for what has happened.
I've said it a few times. We're going to get to that. Councillor Ioannidis.
I just want to begin by thanking Councillor Singh and Councillor Etherington for bringing forward this motion tonight. I plan on supporting it overall in principle, but I think there is a few caution that, as Rod Regier had mentioned, I think content would create some shackling some of the vendors and their events. So I don't know what word that is, and I'll leave that up to you, Mayor Zaire. You said you were going to have some ideas on that. Overall, a lot of things have been mentioned about the balance between confidentiality and transparency, and I want to address that when that comes up. But overall, I think this is good. I think we need to have a process.
Councillor Glenn Graham.
Thanks very much. And I will support this, but I am concerned about hamstringing our special events. So, Mr. Regier, if I understand you correctly, it's the content piece in Councillor Etherington's amendment that gives you pause. Is that correct? If you could just clarify it.
Through you, Mayor Zaire, that's correct. I think the simple fact is that events of this nature evolve, and at a micro programming level, it would be cumbersome if an event organizer had to come back every time one act was substituted for another act, and that sort of thing. You can imagine last-minute changes if illness or whatever changes acts. It'd be the road to madness in some respects. The other complicating factor is for events that are well established as programming, entertainment programming venues, for example, like the Odd. it could become an onerous obligation. You know, those acts, as has already been discussed, those venues are actively programmed many times a year, and they change on a regular basis. So I think that we need to differentiate between venues that are mature and designed specifically to accommodate entertainment on a regular basis from new venues that are emerging and particularly outdoor venues in neighborhoods.
Thank you for clarifying, and I don't know if the word genre would clarify that, because it might get into, you know, heavy metal versus something else, but I wouldn't be comfortable then supporting this with content in there. But overall, I do support the improvement in a process that values people and engagement over simply, you know, another big event that is supportive of a capital project and a developer or a music promoter, because I think we have a lot of people that love music in this town. There's no doubt about that, but I think people felt blindsided. So therefore, I do support the concept of improving trust in this process, and I think we need to err on the side of greater engagement. So with that content out of there, I will support this.
I'm just going to make one suggestion, and perhaps those who are still speaking can speak to this part of it as well. The amendment that Councillor Etherington has brought forward, I think, is sort of establishing the policy, and we're starting to move towards setting something in stone this evening. The first paragraph of Councillor Singh's motion asks for staff to develop the guidelines, which in my mind are to include those things such as location, noise level, and so on. So I think it achieves the same thing, but it allows for the staff to go away and think about this in a little bit more leisurely place, or not under the gun. If we were to change the first paragraph of Councillor Singh's to say that be it resolved that staff develop guidelines for large-scale community events, whether new or recurring, which may take place at city-owned. And I would take out private, but that's another issue. And in that way, I think it deals with those exact things. That's the thing that I think Councillor Etherington is trying to get at, but he's establishing what that is at this point in time. We should probably leave that to come back to us in for greater detail. I just throw that out at this point in time. Councillor Fernandez.
Thank you. I think this is a really great first step, and it certainly will help give the neighborhoods where events may happen a little bit of sense of feeling of engagement and support. I'm hearing a lot of residents now in my area because Conestoga College has been mentioned. So I'm understanding we're going to be speaking about this later, so I will bring up those concerns when we talk about that. Thanks.
Councillor Urbanovich.
Sorry, I know I'm in the queue for the next one.
Okay. Councillor Davey.
Thank you. Yeah, I'm a little concerned by this because it does say clearly in the resolutions, be it resolved, like things like be it resolved that, and there isn't. I don't have the comfort that staff is going to look at this and return with suggestions on how it should be changed. So I guess I would have really liked to have seen staff sort of look at these concerns and then come back with a suggested approach on how to engage the public. Because I'm not sure how much red tape is here, how much these specific clauses will hinder our ability to have the thriving sort of events that we're seeing. So I'm kind of left with an issue of I don't want to be opposed to it, but I just don't think it's been, especially with the new clause as well, that it's been looked at clear enough. And as the Bingmans were brought up, being the ward that represents Bingman Park, which is the only one that comes to mind, and that could potentially be hugely impacted by this, I think it's entirely inappropriate that it be looked at this point without any consultation with the public. So In the very least, I would amend that private outdoor facilities be removed completely from this. And I'm not sure on wording, and this is where it comes into difficulty in having written motions or amendments, but I would like to see wording here that essentially doesn't tie staff to any particular item in this entire motion until they take a look at it and figure out the impacts. Because if the result of this in its entirety, because of this one specific item, would see Big Music Fest not happening, there is no way that I can support this. So I'll leave those comments as they stand.
Okay. An alternative, obviously, considering what you have just said, would be to defer that for staff to come back with some of these issues to be dealt with. But I've got two speakers left, Councillor Singh and Councillor Etherington. I'm going to take, and Mr. Wilmer. So I'm going to take Mr. Wilmer first, and then we'll go back to Councillor Etherington with the amendment, and then to Councillor Singh. So, Mr. Wilmer.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Along the lines of the concerns that Councillor Davey had raised and the suggestion that the Mayor had made, that is one alternative that might be suitable to Council if this was a resolution to direct staff to report back on the matters that are outlined here without them being resolutions themselves. Then we would understand the scope of what you're asking us to report back on, but you wouldn't be making final decisions tonight.
Okay, thank you. I think that may be a wise approach, actually. Councillor Etherington.
Yeah, through you, Mr. Mayor. Just to clear up that, I can live without the word content that Mr. Aguirre has brought up. The only reason I'm saying that is we already have, as part of the Blues Festival, we already have very loud content, some of which is not, in my opinion, but that's only my opinion. It is not blues music, and it could be widened out in the future as to include all kinds of headbanger, hard rock, somehow disguised as blues. Across the country, we see folk festivals that are not folk festivals, blues festivals that are not blues festivals. But my primary concern does have to do with the time length of the concert. If you're a resident living with this and you have to put up with 8-9 straight hours of music that shakes your house, then that's what I'm really concerned about. It's the noise level, and it could be the location, because you could move that tent around in different directions to create different levels of noise. But as far as content, I'm willing to give, you can take that one out as far as I'm concerned.
Councillor Singh.
Yes, thank you. Before I make my comments, I think I should take into suggestions that have already been made. So in the initial resolution, therefore be it resolved that staff develop guidelines for new or reoccurring large-scale community events which may take place at outdoor city-owned venues, removing other private outdoor facilities and specifying to outdoor only. Okay. And as for my comments, they would start off with, are you kidding me? We're concerned about staff resource or the type of commitment that may be required on a lacking in transparency. This should have been done long time ago. Doesn't matter what it requires. And although the shortfall has been highlighted now, we have to take it into account. We can't just sit here and dilly-dally further and carry on with something that was clear, that a public engagement, public information process is missing in our events planning. So the motion where it says that staff develop a guideline, this guideline should have been developed a long time ago. And I think this meets that mandate. And the reason why this motion is coming forward in planning for the Big Music Fest, a clear shortfall in our events planning process was outlined. My concern is with how little involvement the public has had. Approach to this process needs to be corrected, and this motion does that. In the early planning stages, the area residents should have been brought into the conversation. Because McLennan Park is a city district park, events can take place there.
Councillor Singh, we're not going to talk about McLennan Park right now.
It's specific to the example, Mr. Mayor. That's why. events can take place here isn't reason enough that a public consultation isn't built into pre-planning. This motion helps to establish a new standard for excellence, for community involvement and service, and I would urge you and plead that this shortfall be rectified through this motion.
Councillor Gazzola.
I just have a quick question of staff.
Yes, go ahead.
I don't see this music fest that's coming. I think all the rules are in place. Are we intending to be changing that tonight? No. Okay. In that case, I would like to refer back to our staff and listen to them, and I think they've made a good point. Rather than we're here tonight trying to, and the longer we stay, somebody comes up with a new word, a different phrase. I'd like to hear, as staff has suggested, that they bring this back with a lot more information and whatnot, and then we start making decisions at that time when we really have something solid, rather than sitting here changing words and word phrasing and all that. So if I have to pass the deferral to do that, is that what is required? Yes. Or can we just ask staff to do that? I think if we get the sense of what Mr. Wilmer was saying, I think it makes a lot of sense.
The chair doesn't make motions, but what I was going to suggest to you that if this motion were deferred for input from staff to take just exactly what you said, Councillor Gazzola, that nothing would be lost, nothing would be taken away from this resolution, because the very first paragraph that's on the screen right now is saying staff go away and develop the guidelines. So what we're asking staff is to, through a deferral, I would suggest, is with these issues in mind, please go away and come back with that report that encompasses all of these matters. That's what I would suggest. But okay, it's been moved by Councillor Gazzola that a deferral. Would you put a specific time on that, or to?
I don't know what is involved, and it's not. We're looking to the future here.
Okay,
so I would like to staff have enough time to do what they need to do.
I would look to Mr. Wilmer or any other staff that could comment on the timing.
Mr. Regier had circulated to Council earlier today an email that outlines the scope of the project charter for the Big Music Fest, and in that was made a remark that we will do a lessons learned after the event is finished and report back to Council in the fourth quarter of this year. Okay.
Councillors. Okay, so first of all, there is a motion for deferral. Wait just a second. I'm trying to make sure we know the timing of the deferral first. That would be as soon as possible after the... what's the date of the Big Music Fest? As soon as possible after July the 13th. Councillor Gazzola, is that?
Yeah, I would. We have a committee meeting on August 11th.
That's correct.
And I think that, staff can start working on this right now, and they can also get information from what actually happened. So
okay, so that's the motion for deferral to August the 11th. Is there a seconder first before I move on? Councillor Glenn Grave. Now Councillor Singh.
Yeah, Mr. Mayor, so the motion, the way it's outlined, the resolutions in them are quite different and specific. So I can understand the point that Councillor Gazzola is raising as for the guidelines to be developed, but the middle resolution requiring quite specifically and clearly that going forward, the public information session be a requirement to inform residents. I'm not so sure what type of work needs to be done for that. So my question to Councillor Gazzola is he asking for deferral of common sense as he's outlined it?
Okay, we'll go back to Councillor Gazzola as to whether you're referencing the entire resolution you see in front of us or just the first clause.
I really see the whole resolution. I mean, we need to be looking at public engagement for most things that we do, and especially when there's a big common sense would have told us that we should have been talking to the public, or should have been letting the public know on this issue. I don't think so. I would be looking at everything.
Okay. Okay. Councillor Verbanovich?
Well, Mr. Mayor, I can't support the deferral. I think what's important here on the issue of timing is that the issue of developing guidelines and the issue of reviewing what happened are two separate things. And I think from a timeliness perspective, I think it's incumbent on us to get those guidelines in place as soon as possible. We can amend them in the future if we need to, or whatever the case is. But I think we need to look at that so that if other events or opportunities present themselves in the future, we're prepared and have something in place. And I think that's what Councillor Singh is trying to address. Have them in place so that we're prepared better next time.
Okay. So there is a legitimate motion for deferral to August the 11th for the entire motion that is in front of us. And that I will deal with that motion now. Yes, the timing, because that's the only change that can be made on a deferral motion. She's got it. Councillor Galloway-Seelon.
Yeah, I would amend the deferral motion just based on timing to the June 9th meeting. I think that's a committee day. Just and the rationale would be so that we can try and implement those for the summer programming.
Councillor Zola.
I don't have an issue with that. I just know that June we get a ton of stuff. So June, that's fine. I'll accept that.
The motion has been amended. Well, it's actually your motion now just changed to June the 9th. Okay, a recorded vote has been called for on deferral. This is of the entire matter to June the 9th. Recorded vote has been called for. Yes. This is deferral. This is deferral of the entire motion, this issue, until June the 9th. Now we have the other screen on, but that'll override it, will it? Okay, the motion for deferral carries. Counting correctly, I think. Yes. 6-5. Okay. So the direction is essentially for staff to take all of the information that has just been talked about and consider all those matters for a report on June the 9th. We are still under new business, and it is item 9B. Councillor Verbanovich.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. The motion that's before us is a result of the announcement back a few months ago by Canada Post with respect to their new 5-point action plan to essentially, not essentially, but to get rid of door-to-door mail delivery and to replace it with community mailboxes throughout the city. And they're looking at doing that, I believe, if I recall correctly, over the next 5 years across the country. While I and others may have personal views on that issue, the motion that's before us focuses specifically on the issues that impact the City of Kitchener and our residents and the kinds of policies that we deal with. And so I will just very quickly read the operative phrase,
yes,
which is that the City of Kitchener, through the Federation of Canadian Municipalities, requests that Canada Post commit to having meaningful consultations with Canada's cities and communities before implementation of the plan. Be it further resolved that the above consultations lead to a set of agreed-upon principles nationally, as well as a mechanism to accommodate area-specific requirements with any local implementation if this part of the 5-point action plan proceeds. Be it further resolved that Canada Post commit that the proposed changes in the 5-point action plan will not download the costs and maintenance of the community mailboxes onto municipalities without proper consultation and compensation. And finally, that this resolution be shared with FCM, local MPs, and the minister responsible for Canada Post.
Okay. And the seconder is Councillor Davey. For discussion now, Councillor Etherington.
Yeah, just one quick comment, Mr. Mayor, and that is that I will be supporting this, but I'm extremely disappointed that the FCM, AMO, and more municipal councils have not come out in opposition to the loss or the elimination of door-to-door mail delivery. I completely understand that the post office thumbs its nose at local councils, pays no attention, but I think that effort should have been made along with this particular resolution.
I can't speak for AMO, but I can speak for FCM and Big City Mayor's Caucus, that in fact resolutions have been placed and was a matter of discussion, again, to the extent that it affects municipalities. Councillor Fernandez.
Thanks. I just have a question of Councillor Verbanovich. Was there something that you heard or indicated that Canada Post was planning in any way to download the maintenance or the cost of this to municipalities? I was just, is there some information that maybe has not been coming out to the public in general that maybe we need to be challenging Canada Post on?
Councillor Babbage.
Yeah, the concern, Councillor Fernandez, is that there hasn't been clarity specifically on that issue. That they haven't been clear on what the process is going to be around where these are going to be located, how do we decide whose house they go in front of, what about maintenance issues, accessibility issues, and so on. And it's issues that have been raised by a number of municipalities at FCM, by the Big City Mayor's Caucus, as Mayor Zare identified, and so on. And so it's making it clear that this shouldn't be a downloading on us, and these issues need to be addressed going forward.
Great, thanks for that clarification.
Okay, I see no further speakers, so now the record vote's been called for on this motion. You can now vote. That's carried unanimously. Thank you. Okay, any other new business? And new business questions, answers sort of flow together here, so we'll deal with them all at the same time. Councillor Verbanovich.
Thanks, Mr. Mayor. Two quick things. The first one today happens to be April 1st, which I understand is tomorrow. Tomorrow is April 1st. No joke. But today happens to be the last day with respect to the funding for the Victoria Park washrooms. And so I thought it might be a good opportunity to ask Ms. Houston for an update on how we've done and how we've managed to hopefully maximize our federal contribution to that project.
Ms. Houston.
Through you, Mr. Mayor, I'm pleased to report that the facility is substantially complete as of today, and we've submitted our final application for the submission for the grant. So we've met our requirements for the March 31st deadline. There is some outside work that still needs to be completed. Obviously, with the weather, we still need to do some paving, some concrete, some sodding and landscaping around the facility. So we expect to be able to open it for public use probably early May.
Great. Well, that's certainly fantastic news, and I think probably only appropriate to thank staff for and the contractor for all of their hard work during what has been less than an ideal winter to get the job done and get it done in a way that's going to ensure that we get our funding. So thank you very much on that. The second question I have is to Mr. Chapman, and it has to do with respect to infrastructure funding. And I noticed on Friday that the federal government opened up their process for applications for funding. And I'm wondering if staff have had an opportunity to take a look at that, or will they? And will a report be coming back to us in that regard?
Mr. Chapman.
Through you, Mr. Mayor, we've been reviewing all of the information that's been coming out with respect to the Building Canada Fund, and there has only been general information available to this point. You're correct, there was more released on Friday. So we're presently reviewing that. We anticipate taking a report to the corporate leadership team at their upcoming meeting, following which we'll come back to council.
Okay, great. And my final one, Mr. Mayor, has to do with snow budget potholes and tree cleanup. And I know this has been an unusually difficult winter. I know that we've had challenges with respect to the snow budget. I can only imagine the challenges with respect to potholes as well as the tree cleanup. And we see branches still needing cutting, as well as sitting on all sorts of boulevards from street trees. And I'm just wondering if I can ask for a report to come back from staff to an upcoming probably community services meeting with respect to how we've managed to, with respect to the snow budget. Do we need to take any budgetary corrective action, maybe from our capital budgets or whatever, because of any overages so far this year, as well as what the game plan is for potholes and the tree cleanup? Because I suspect, I'm already getting lots of calls and complaints about potholes, more than usual, and I suspect pretty soon we'll be getting them on the tree cleanup. And so I think a game plan update would be helpful for all members of council.
I saw Ms. Houston nodding.
Thank you.
Councillor Singh.
Yes, thank you. And Mr. Mayor, I had a motion as well. Are we going that would require a motion to waive notice? I can speak to that after. I had queued in for a different question, but how would you like to take it?
The Councillor Singh has indicated that he had a motion related to the emerald ash borer and the stumping and that sort of thing. Since it is a budgetary item, and it's we had dealt with it during the budget, in fact, in one of the issue papers, I would say that it requires a notice of motion. We can waive that notice of motion, though, if you so desire, and that we would have to do that first before we would enter into the discussion.
Good. I had wanted to ask that question, but I had queued in for something different. Can I ask that question of staff, and then we can go to this item? Or
yes.
Okay.
Can deal
so
with the other item.
What I had queued in was part of my initial motion for obviously public consultation, which was deferred. I also wanted to ask staff and some of the questions that have been raised by other council members today as well, as for lack of information provided to council for the big music fest leading up to now. And still, there hasn't been a clear report that has been come to council outlining some specifics, especially specifics more referring to mitigation measures that would be put in place to lessen the impact to the neighborhood residents. So my question to staff would be, have more of a final strategy been outlined yet as for parking? That would be the biggest impact to the area residents. I have already asked staff to organize a neighborhood or area public information session scheduled for April 16th. I just want to confirm that the final strategy would be outlined for that day so that we have that clear information available for the residents that would come in.
Okay. Mr. Regier.
Through you,
And,
Mayor Zaire.
Just before you comment, and since we're on that subject, if there are other people that wish to deal with that, the big music fest, this would be the time to enter into that discussion. And we'll come back to the EAB after that. So, Mr. Regier.
Through you, Mayor Zaire, with the parking solutions for the bulk of parking are well underway. We've identified a number of significant lots that have capacity. In fact, more capacity than we will actually need. I believe that the detailed discussions are now underway with those property owners about the way that this might work and what the conditions of operations might be. So the simple answer to the question is that a plan is currently under development. As far as I know, it's progressing well, but it won't actually be in place for a couple of weeks yet. So, but we're optimistic. Everything looks like we have enthusiastic support from the people who own large properties in that area.
Okay, well, my earlier part of my question was as for lack of information provided to council leading up to this and the rationale for that.
Well, through you, Mayor Zaire, I guess the information about the nature of the event has been evolving, and the staff team have been engaged in discussions with the ward councillor and with a couple of other members of council that have been specifically interested in the project over the last couple of months as this event started to take shape. The event planning process has been in the purview of staff, and there hasn't been up to this point, any specific council request for that information. We are gathering the detailed plan as we speak, and we'll be bringing forward. And as I indicated in the email earlier today, the project planning team will be meeting on a regular basis, and we can inform council as this event unfolds.
And finally, Mr. Mayor, again, you raised the point that staff have been working with the ward councillor and few other councillors as well. Well, this ward councillor happened to walk into a sitting organized meeting only about a month before the event became public knowledge. Any reason for why the ward councillor wasn't included in the final stages of planning or even pre-planning?
Through you, Mayor Zaire, I can't tell you. I have no idea.
Okay, well, that's part of the shortfall. Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Oh, and finally, the report. Is there a report coming to council?
We haven't planned one to bring forward to council. What we do have planned, as is indicated in the project charter, is that we will bring forward an analysis after the fact. We will be bringing forward the information that's available to the community in the community meeting, and I think that we can circulate that information in advance to council for your information.
I still think it's important to have a report coming to council outlining the efforts that staff are making in planning to be sensitive to the neighborhood, and I think a report should come before so we can be reflective of after the events as well.
You know, I beg your pardon, Mayor Zaire. I do notice that our manager of special events has proposed a report to council in May. Of course, we need to bring forward information to council to request a noise exemption and a midway license. So that report shall be provided to council in advance of that discussion. And it'll outline the various arrangements that we've made. By that point, all of the parking arrangements will have been made as well.
Yes, the report that was the project charter, as it is called, circulated today, states that a council report will be coming in May. There are two council meetings, May 5th and May 26th. So obviously on one of those two dates, noise exemption, there's a midway license and a few other items that will be coming forward. So speaking on that item, I have four people here. If you Before I click you in, was it on this item, Councillor Etherington? Yes. Okay. Go ahead.
Through you, Mr. Mayor, a quick comment. As a councillor, I started to say earlier that my first priority is to try to represent the people in my ward and the people across the city. I can't do that when I know nothing about this event, and the fact that I knew nothing made me very angry. I'd like to ask Mr. Aguirre, and give me names, please, who knew about this event? Did the mayor know about the event? Who knew about the event?
That would be a question you would ask of the mayor and of the members of council, I would suggest. It's not,
Sure.
not appropriate for Mr. Aguirre to name names if
Okay,
it sounds
well,
like a conspiracy.
let's turn that around and say, through you, Mr. Mayor, did you know or who did know?
I found out about this. We had our budget meeting on, was it January 30 or something like that? And I found out about it earlier in January or late December. I cannot recall. It was, to me, it was another event that our staff were working on and talking to people, just like so many other events, that it wasn't something that that was in the early stages. They were talking about this could happen. Nothing had happened at that point in time yet. So it was, to me, it was the normal negotiations that are occurring with between staff and other with promoters.
And when we spout off so much about transparency and communication with residents, why didn't the rest of council know? Who should I ask that question to? Like, why were we not told in open session, not in camera?
Well, there are. Mr. Wilmer has clicked in, so I'll go over to him. But from a political standpoint, there are many things that are discussed that are not of a common nature, a common information for council and the public, because there is nothing to talk about yet. They're just ideas, and I would suggest that this was one of them. But Mr. Wilmer?
Through the mayor, it is within staff's purview to support and negotiate to arrange with partners to put on special events, and that's exactly what we were doing in this case. There was at that time no decision to be made by councils, and therefore no need for us to report to council. It was also understood that because of negotiations that the promoter was undertaking in terms of which acts, which dates, and whether or not, in fact, Kitchener would be the community that would host this, there was really nothing final that we could announce, and these negotiations were taking place, and the promoter had requested that we keep things confidential. And so at the time the promoter decided to make this public, caught us a little bit off guard, because we had expected there would be about another week or so before anybody would make it public. And at that time, we would be able to inform council before it became public. That didn't happen, and that was a decision that the promoter made.
Mr. Wilmer, I'm amazed to hear you say that. I don't think staff should ever consider a suggestion that council not be told about an event of this size, which is going to cause so much concern in the neighborhood. I appreciate that a promoter or an organizer of a concert would want that kind of secrecy and would want control of the whole. But give me a break. We don't do it that way. One other question. Did the organizers of this event, or the few people at City Hall who seemed to know about the concert, realize that it would collide head-on with Cultron? It's a Neruda-associated event that's happening that weekend. Can anyone answer that question?
Mr. Regier.
I unfortunately can't answer the question, but we have many events, many weekends when we have multiple events underway. The city is becoming very active culturally. Center in the Square Museum, the Odd are often running events at the same time. So this wouldn't have been something that we would have considered too much of a threat. We certainly don't think, we think of them as very different events with potentially very different markets. And in fact, in some respects, they might even be complementary in the sense that the Big Music Festival will bring an audience to the city of Kitchener, which is unique and significant. So I wouldn't be concerned personally about that kind of conflict.
Thank you very much.
Councillor Gazzola, on this topic? Councillor Gazzola.
I've been waiting for a couple of weeks, and now most of my questions have been asked, but I'm going to go back to the question. I would like to know from what members of council knew about this. That question hasn't been asked. I've heard that it goes back to January and December. And I would like to know why this wasn't brought to council, why the rest of council. The first I heard about it was the newspaper on a Saturday morning that I read. And then I started getting emails about what is this all about. So can somebody answer me as to what members of council are in the elite group that they know these things that aren't shared with the rest of council?
There are a number of people who have indicated they wish to speak. I will let them speak for themselves. I'm not going to...
Can I not ask that question? Who do you know who knew?
They will be answered when their turn comes up to speak.
Okay, that's fine. In the fullness of time, all of these things will come up. I don't understand the necessity for this secrecy. That's something that I cannot get a grasp with. I think, and I'm so upset because we're always talking about transparency and public engagement, and yet here we just blew it. And there's not been any real explanation come forward. And this is not only a question of the majority of council not knowing what was going on. The public that live and will be most affected with this had no idea. But it's also the other organizations in our community, like that Coltrane, the Neruda, the Blues. Were there other people competing to bring this here that we had to keep it secret as to what acts were coming? And when you get old like me, who knows the difference between those acts? I think we deserve some answers. And I think there's a lot of tap dancing been going on. But let's face it, we made a mistake. Let's be the best. When you make a mistake, the best answer is to come out and lay it out all on the table. I have another question on another issue.
Okay, then
before the end of the night.
When we're finished with this, you can back in. Councillor Fernandez, on this issue?
Yes.
Okay.
I've been hearing from constituents who live in the Conestoga College area. I guess it's been alluded to that the college will be a parking. I guess some of the information I think that might be important for the citizens going forward, wherever the parking is going to be happening, is how are we dealing with anybody who has been drinking at the festival. So those are information if they're not allowed to leave their cars in the parking lots. So those are questions that I'm being asked. So I just want staff to know that those are questions I'm being asked. The other thing that I would like to have some kind of indication is looking at the list of staff that are involved in this. What kind of time is this taking from our staff? I mean, it's a fairly new initiative. Does this mean that their staff is taking time from other projects and work that was originally planned for them? And how are we going to rationalize that out at the end of the day? I would expect that when we have an event of this magnitude that we should see some kind of revenue from this. I don't understand what that is at this point in time, but there's always both checks and balances, costs and revenues, And I think some of that has to be clear for the public as well as for us around council.
Mr. Regier.
Yeah, through you, Mayor Zaire. The event is taking quite a bit of time from our event manager right now. It's a significant file for him, and Jen Zunick is the event coordinator. That's really where the bulk of the time is being spent. It is an extraordinary. It's out of the ordinary for us to do this, but because it's a new opportunity for the event in a new location outside of the downtown, we felt that it's worth making the investment of special events time to facilitate the process properly. The other members of the team are not involved on a full-time basis. They're being pulled in on an as-needed basis to consult in areas where they have special expertise or responsibilities. You can see in the draft project charter that we've identified a schedule of meetings. That's really only to facilitate the dialogue so that everybody knows when the discussions are taking place and they can plan accordingly. It's certainly not necessary for everybody on that team to be at every meeting because simply put, as soon as we finish up with the parking requirements and get that locked down, then it won't be needed. People who are responsible for that won't be necessary at the event. So at those particular coordination meetings. The people that are identified here as being on the project team are really on only to address specific concerns to make sure that those concerns are all covered off.
Okay. And one sort of final question tying in with what you were just talking about and communications and communicating to the public. Will there be an avenue for residents, area residents, but either around the event or around where all the parking is going to happen, for them to ask questions and be given information that will put their fears and concerns aside?
Yes, certainly. Through you, Mayor Zaire, we've got a public meeting, an open house scheduled for April the 16th. We've also identified a parking system so that local residents will be able to acquire parking passes for guests that they are hosting on that particular for the event, but that we don't have mass parking on the street from event participants. As I mentioned earlier, we've identified space for some 12,000 cars elsewhere in the in South Kitchener on large established parking areas. So we'll be putting in place a bus shuttle system on a cost recovery basis to make sure that nobody has to drive to this particular venue in order to get there.
And I understand that venue is likely Conestoga College, which...
I can speak to that very briefly. It's one of 3 or 4 large parking areas that we're in discussions with, and it would be limited at Conestoga College. If that was one of the venues, it would be limited to the existing established paved parking area.
Mm-hmm. I guess my residents are used to having a quiet summer without students. They're going to have a bit of an adjustment on this one. Okay, I look forward to some of the public information and meetings and communications coming forward.
Councillor Davey.
Thank you, Mayor Zaire. In response to a couple councillors' questions, in the interest of full disclosure, I first heard about this probably about 6 weeks or so ago. I have no part of this event, but just through informal conversation with members of council that were aware. My question is, in realizing a full report is coming back, I've heard some concern about potential costs. Could I hear some revenue sources that will be coming from this event?
Through you, Mayor Zaire, the primary source of revenue to the city will be in the in parking. We'll be collecting fees for parking on all the lots, and we expect those fees to be in excess of the actual operating cost for the shuttle service. We're still working out the final details on how that'll all work, so we aren't able to present a draft set of numbers, but we expect that the revenue there will be revenue coming back to the city on a net basis.
Mr. Wilmer wants to add something to that.
So I certainly support what Mr. Regier had said. I would also add that the event promoter themselves or the organizer will be paying for the staff costs for people who are working the weekend of the event, and that includes our own transportation, security, policing, and so on. In addition, and I think this is a point that needs to be emphasized, that the main revenue benefit to this community is to the community, not necessarily to the corporation of the city, but to hotels, restaurants, retailers, other business people in the community. They will be the primary beneficiaries of the type of activity and the volumes of visitors that we'll have to the community.
Thank you. I appreciate that. Having 20,000 people a day come is obviously going to have some spin-off effect. But to be clear then, so after the garbage is cleaned up and the parks repaired and everything, we are expecting net income to the city at this point.
I don't think we can guarantee that, no. I think that if at the end of the day we break even and we've generated some vitality and economic benefit to the community, that will be something that we'll, again, report back to council, and you can decide whether that's a success that we want to continue in future years, or whether you see it as not a success and something that we would look at as a one-off event.
Okay, thank you very much.
Councillor Galloway-Seelock.
Yeah, I too will say that I heard from this in the news actually on Twitter, so that was the first time that I heard of this. I had no previous knowledge to the event. My question actually was going to be explaining some of the benefits to the community with regards to an event of this nature, but I think Mr. Wilmer just kind of outlined a number of benefits to the community. So I don't have a question, just comments that it's hard for me to understand. I understand that we want to be transparent with the community, but this is, in my opinion, it's positive for the community as a whole. There's definitely going to be an impact to the residents nearby, and I think with the public meeting that's going to occur and with staff working diligently, we're going to be able to assist those residents as much as possible. It's the first time we're doing something of this magnitude at McLennan Park. It is our park. It is staff's purview to be able to book this facility for something of this nature. I understand why people would have liked to have known before it hit the news, me included. You can think of the examples of when major concerts going to hit the auditorium. We know we usually get a little note right before the announcement is made, but we keep that confidential because the announcement needs to be made. And I'm sure that that was probably staff's intent to do it that way, but as Mr. Wilmer has outlined, they were caught off guard with regards to the announcement of this music festival. There's no doubt there's going to be challenges, and I think after the event, I think there also needs to be an opportunity or a mechanism for the residents of the area to be able to provide feedback of what worked and what didn't work, and things that could change, because if it's my understanding from reading in the news that this has the potential to continue on in the future. And so I think that feedback is as important as the upfront feedback and concerns that may be raised at the public meeting. But again, I think really it's staff's job to attract and get these types of vibrant community events, and they've done their job. The only thing that didn't happen, and they admit it, is that we didn't know in advance. It got leaked before we knew. And that's unfortunate. But we're also trying to put in place now new guidelines to engage the residents earlier on in the process. And I think that that's a good step that we'll take when staff come back with those guidelines. I really do believe that we have the ability to continue to work with residents. We still have a couple months to try and alleviate the concerns and work with them to the best of our ability. But I do believe this is a good event for our city.
Councillor Ioannidis.
Thank you. Through you, Mayor Zaire. I can say I was the initial contact when it came to this event. So that has not been kept secret in the sense of letting council members know about it, because at the time when you do hear about events and you're working on events and you don't know if an event's going to occur, we don't have this conversation with each other. Other members all the time get phone calls and have ideas. I don't hear those ideas until it comes to committee or council chambers. So I don't think anything out of the ordinary has happened, and overall, I think you can spin this any way you want, but this is a tremendous, great story to the community. And if this was to happen again, and under different circumstances, with the proper processes, I would do it again. A lot of things have been mentioned about the balance between confidentiality and transparency around Big Music Fest. I don't disagree, and I have some concerns about it as well. However, in the context of a unique opportunity presented to the city and the absence of more comprehensive policy around these events, I feel staff and council have been extremely diligent in trying to find the appropriate balance between ensuring this event comes to Kitchener and ensuring that potential neighborhoods' concerns are being addressed in the same professional manner with which other large events are managed in the city, such as Blues Festival, Multicultural Festival, Oktoberfest. In the over 3 years that I've been on Kitchener Council, I've been one of Council's strongest advocates for the awesome music scene we have here in Kitchener and Waterloo region. From the Kitchener Blues Festival to Koi Fest, and from the incredible music scene at several downtown bars to seeing how we grow music as part of our MusicWorks economic cluster through initiatives like the Kitchener Studio Project, our city has been supportive of both of these institutions and the local talent and festivals that bring our music scene to the forefront. I have and will continue to work feverishly to enhance them. As a member of council, I will continue to support and work with city staff in developing MusicWorks as an economic strategy. I will continue to support seeing the Boathouse thrive as a music venue for both our indie musicians and more established talent. And I will continue to both connect the city to the Ontario Media Development Corporation and the provincial and national music scenes by working with colleagues, staff, and music organizations, and with local musicians. Through this process, we have learned where we are nimble and where we are not for these types of events. And I will work equally hard to ensure that in the future we have more effective process for these opportunities in the future. However, I won't apologize for showing leadership and taking a great opportunity presented to our city, taking it to staff, and trying to bring it to fruition. That's what I was elected to do. And if I didn't, I wouldn't be doing my job. We all believe we have something special here. Big Music Fest will enhance the amazing scene that we have already and build on it and help enhance our municipality and region on a national and international stage as a place where music happens.
Councillor Yunetsky.
Thank you. In light of a variety of comments that have been made here around the horseshoe, I probably am one that also fits in with the majority who did not know anything about this until it was mentioned in the paper, unfortunately. And I mean, it would have been nice to have heard about it ahead of time through staff. I know maybe the intent was there, but timing and with the intent of the promoter, things just didn't fall into place. I do have a concern in terms of what the impact would be on the residents, and I know staff are diligently trying to address that, and I know it's a very large undertaking, and it will take many, many hours and many, many staff people to address it. So I feel comfortable in that they'll do their due diligence and try to make this successful and pull it off. A few questions that I have is that haven't really been brought up that may cause me a concern is in terms of drinking. Is it going to be permitted? Is there a liquor license going to be provided on the facilities or not? I haven't heard any mention of that. The other concern comes down to is the current use of the facility up on the hill. There's a splash pad up there that's middle of the summer, and people are going to be taking their kids and family out there to enjoy the nice hot weather. We're talking July, which is the peak period. What happens to that particular facility in terms of, is it closed down and not used for families, and they're told not to come during the festival? I have no idea. Maybe these questions will come up to be answered unless staff have an answer right now. So I still do have some concerns. I understand the direction that's intended, but I'm disappointed at how this is all unfolded, just like a number of other councillors have been.
Mr. Regier, you have some additional information?
Well, just to Councillor Yanetsky's two questions, just briefly. There will be licensed elements to this venue. However, we have a very experienced event promoter. They will be engaging in an extensive staff on site. I can't remember the specific numbers, but I know that I can recall being impressed by the number of people that will be paid on staff. They will also be paying for all of their paid duty police services for the area within the boundary of the venue. We have had extensive discussions with our with regional police and with our own security people, and they are satisfied with the measures being taken to deal with that type of an event. The event, as I will mention, is not any larger than what we currently have with the Blues Festival, for example. So we have in place protocols and measures for dealing effectively with large events of this nature. I will say that that McClellan Park will be a fenced area for the duration of that particular weekend. So it will disrupt the normal activities of the park during the 3 days of the operations, and that is a unique circumstance to this particular venue.
Councillor Verbanovich.
Thanks, Mr. Mayor. And obviously, this is an issue that's getting much attention around this horseshoe. And I too share many of the same concerns and views of my colleagues around the horseshoe. But I also think it's important that we keep this in perspective. And there's a lot of issues being brought forward that I guess are surprising me a little bit to hear some of the comments that are being raised. For example, questions around alcohol, and yet we don't seem to have a problem dealing with Blues Festival or Oktoberfest and the alcohol that's associated with those events. I hear issues being raised around what we know and what we don't know, and sure, that concerns me as well in terms of this process, and I think the motion that Councillor Singh was trying to deal with earlier this evening was trying to address that sooner rather than later, but unfortunately it got deferred. However, there's been other instances of events, quite frankly, where Council also hasn't found out. I mean, they may have been smaller in scope, but I look, for example, at the fact that there was an Earth Hour event planned at City Hall. The way I found out was when the first draft of the media release went out from communications. There was no advance notice to Council. We hear about other events, like apparently there's a new night festival that some members of Council are involved with. Nothing's been shared broadly with members of Council about that yet. I know that members of Council have asked about things like zip lines and other things. That hasn't been broadly shared with all members of Council. So let's just, I know it's election year, but let's cut down on some of the rhetoric. And let's deal with the issues, and there are some legitimate issues. And the most important legitimate issues here are the ones, Councillor Yanetsky, please show some respect and don't, be mimicking me with your hands while I'm talking. I think what we need to do is keep the focus on what the issues are here. And the issues are that the public and council weren't made aware of the issue as soon as possible. Part of that is because of the fact that the news came out in an untimely manner, and therefore that needs to be corrected for the future. And I think that's going to be dealt with. Secondly, we can't lose sight of the fact that this is going to have significant economic and entertainment value to our community. And for that, I'm appreciative of the fact that a member of council has actually worked on that. It speaks highly to the clusters that we have all around this horseshoe talked about. The music cluster, the tech cluster, attracting people to want to live in our community. So let's not lose sight of those issues. I think it's important that report on the neighborhood issues come to council as soon as possible. I'm concerned about parking and traffic issues in particular. I've heard some things, and again, there's lots of rumors flying around, so I'm hopeful that the report, when it does come through, will show that, issues are going to be dealt with effectively. And if they are, you know what? We have professional staff that are going to deal with this like they deal with every other festival that brings 30 and 50,000 people to downtown Kitchener or other parts of the city.
Okay, those are the only people that I have to line up to speak. I'll just make a couple of comments. Perhaps some of them are reiterating others. I've already mentioned as to when I became aware of this. And it's been pointed out as well that there are many events at the auditorium, big name events. This is when the headliners come to town, that under most circumstances, we find out about it the day or so before the event is to be announced. Likewise, at the Centre of the Square, when there are headliners that are coming, that the board members will sometimes we know months in advance because we're talking to so-and-so and that sort of thing. But for the most part, the major headliners, for good marketing purposes, even the board is not aware of it. And no one really complains about that. And we have not complained about it here at the city related to the auditorium either. I think through this process, though, it has become I've become more aware that there has to be some greater collaboration in making sure that the three organizations that we have some influence over are talking to each other to make sure that there aren't conflicts as much as possible. And those three organizations are our event staff, our auditorium staff, and the Centre in the Square staff. And I've already spoken to our staff about that and to the Centre in the Square as well. And I think that we'll find that kind of open dialogue will be occurring more often in the future. It really is, unfortunately, becomes a little bit of a political football. So our time now should be spent in making sure that the operations are done correctly and that there is as much information that is possible to give to the public is done as in a timely fashion, and that we will be putting together a policy that will address these things perhaps earlier than they have been in this particular case. So with that, I think we will move on.
Gazzola asked a question, and I also wanted to answer that question, which is I have heard about this issue from Councillor Ioannidis and Councillor Singh at some point over the past number of weeks. I can't remember exactly where, so I just wanted to be transparent and have that clear as well.
Okay. All right, we're going back to the list of other issues under new business or questions and answers, and I had Councillor Gazzola first.
Yeah, this deals with the better weather that we're having, and I've been getting some calls about the results of the storm back in December, where people have a lot of parts of trees and twigs around it, and they're wondering what, if anything, can be done. I spoke to staff earlier this evening, and they've come up with, I think, are some good ideas to deal with the issue, but it's going to be limited to some time. So I've asked And I understand there's going to be a media release going out in a day or so, and I just asked Ms. Johnson if she could just sort of, that we've got the advantage of the TV audience, if she could just relate a little bit about what we're planning, how we're planning to deal with that.
Ms. Johnson?
Through you, Mayor Zare. Thank you, Councillor Gazzola. You're correct. There is a media release that will be going out in the coming days. What I can tell you at this point is that from April 14th to May 2nd, city crews will be out clearing tree debris from the boulevards across the city. Residents, though, that have tree limbs on their private property, the region has started their yard waste management program actually today. So they're more than welcome, and they probably should be encouraged to bundle their limbs and leave them out for the pickup from the region. Information on that program can be found on the region's website.
There are certain restrictions as to size, as we all
There
know,
are,
related to that. So anyone wanting to do that should check the region's website as to the yard waste pickup details. Okay, Councillor Gazzola?
Yes, thank you.
Councillor Fernandez.
Thank you. I had asked a few weeks back to understand how much we've been spending on consultants, and Mr. Chapman was kind enough to send me that information. I just felt like we had been doing an awful lot more in the last calendar year than we have in the previous years, notwithstanding actually the first year that we were elected, when we spent close to $5 million, and we were pretty close. We were at $4.895 million in consulting fees. This is really concerning. I understand that some of these fees are paid through development charges, through utilities, and that sort of budget. But when I look at, we're spending close to $500,000 in consulting fees for items that are under $25,000, which means that they don't have to come to council. So I guess I don't know what I would need from council, but I think that it would be important for us to understand how some of these break down, and maybe specifically the $500,000 that we're spending on under $25,000 in consulting fees, because it doesn't come to council. There may very well be a possibility that we could be doing some of this in-house. And it's concerning to me. One that really stuck out in my mind, because I don't remember it, so is this $132,653 for Epton property. So I may have to get a bit more of a clarification from staff on that one in particular. So I guess I'm asking, because I was informed by Mr. Chapman, if I wanted further information, I needed to bring that forward to council to ask for a bit more in-depth report. And so I'd like to make that motion at this time. I realize that we want written motions, but I guess I need support from council for a report.
I'm not sure what you're really asking for, though. I mean, and perhaps you could actually put it forward in a motion, even at committee, so that we would have a little more time to discuss what it might be.
Okay, I'd be more than happy to do that. Well, now that I have the information before me, what I'll do is I'll draft a motion under
bring it to
Finance Committee.
Yeah, I think it would be Finance and Corporate Affairs.
Okay, I'll be happy to do that. Great, thank you very much.
Councillor Singh.
Yes, so to my EAB motion?
Yes.
Okay, all right.
And you actually all have a single sheet in front of you talking about the procedure. And since the issues of EAB that are wrapped up in the suggested motion was part of the budget process, it would need a motion for reconsideration. First of all, though, it would have to be waiver of notice, because there is nothing that was on the agenda at this point in time. So a motion would need to be brought forward to waive the notice of motion, which would obviously have to have 2/3 majority, which is a number of 8. So we'll deal with that item first, not getting into any of the detail. Councillor Singh.
That's fine. If I can just quickly speak to why a notice to waive motion is necessary. The motion was submitted to the Clerk's Department on Wednesday. as is the deadline. It just happened to be when the motion was received, it was their opinion that further information was necessary, so it wasn't included as part of the agenda. But I still felt it to proceed forward once information was received. That's the only reason. So it's not just being dumped on today.
Okay, is there, so you are moving the waiving notice. Is there a second for that? Councillor Fernandez. Okay. We'll vote now on the waiver of notice. Those in favor, keep your hands up, please. Those opposed, I'm opposed. That is carried. So now we need to have a motion to reconsider. There are on this individual sheet in front of you. There are two reconsider motions, but we'll take them as one because they are interrelated.
I just have a question of procedure, Mr. Mayor,
yes.
to that effect. For the motion to reconsider for one of the resolutions, which is for the 320,000 LEAF allocation. Again, it was my understanding that the LEAF allocation was for the purpose of mitigating the effects of the cutting of EAB. So I'm still unsure why a motion to reconsider would be necessary when prioritizing it for Ward 4 and 6. I would think that would be still part of the realm of the initial direction to staff.
I should probably, before I rule on that one, the original motion related to LEAF. Do we have that here? I've got some information from the January 30 motions, but I'm not sure I have that one. Colin, you had given me some information. The original, all of you will recall there was a budget issue paper for Emerald Ash Borer Strategy, and part of that discussion had a 10-year capital expenditure projection. Some of it was for budgeted removals and injections, and then was for stumping and planting, and the stumping and planting didn't occur until 2018. And that was where the larger of the two amounts were.
And again, initially, sorry, I apologize to interrupt because there's clarity to that as necessary. The reason why it's stated as 2018, Mr. Mayor, because it was never prior to this allocation any funding for, and this resolved that. I'm just coming to that because further as part of the report, there was approximately $3 million from the LEAF fund that was being dealt with that. I don't want to be an obstructionist to whatever council wants on this. I really don't. But I think if we don't go through the reconsideration, we open up the door for other budget modifications without going through this process. They may be absolutely legitimate, but I think that that would be the case. So I would say that a reconsideration, we can take them both together as reconsideration of this matter related to the Emerald Ash Borer and its funding. We're clear on that? Councillor Gazzola.
Yeah, I'm not clear on what we're doing here.
Well, you have a motion in front of you.
Which I've just seen. It was dropped.
It was on the table earlier.
Well, but I was paying attention here, so I didn't get a chance to read it.
And so, in order to deal with that motion, it was not on the agenda. So we've dealt with the waiver of motion, waiver of notice. Now we're dealing with the matter that it needs reconsideration to.
So are we trying to make a decision on this tonight?
Could be. That's the.
All of a sudden, we're going to spend $320,000 and.
Councillor Gazzola, that is the intent of the motion, and you'll have to deal with it as you see fit. Personally, I got some problems with it too, but that's not the point. I'm trying to deal with it in a procedural way for exactly the reason you're talking about. But we can't just continue on making those kinds of decisions.
So if we defeat, I have no problem with revisiting something, re-looking at it or something, but not to make a decision tonight.
That may end up being the case. This is only what I have to do it in stages, as you can understand.
Well, I would want to defer it.
Well, that may be the case. But we first, you have to deal with the reconsideration motion. Do you wish to reconsider the budgeted items related to the EAB? So, the motion for reconsideration is put forward by Councillor Singh. It is seconded by Councillor Fernandez. Councillor Singh, you're still on there.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. And just a point to be made to the last thing that Councillor Gazzola said, motion to reconsider does not prioritize or give direction as to what to do with those funds. It only allows for a debate to happen. And it'll give me an opportunity to advise council with my intent of my motion.
Okay, so there is a motion for reconsideration. If you're calling for it, it is, yes? Okay. Sure. It's now been called for, a recorded vote. You have to switch screens. There we go. The motion for reconsideration carries. It is 8-3. It needed 8 for reconsideration. Okay, we have to get the motion on the floor first. Councillor Singh, you're still on. And then I'll go back to Councillor Gazzola.
Yes, Mr. Mayor, am I able to give a quick presentation for the motion prior to putting it on the table? Because I hear that Councillor Gazzola is going to be circumvent the process quite quickly and try to defer before any fruitful discussion can be had, which I find disrespectful to the process, but that's his prerogative. So could I speak to the presentation as part of it early on, which was intended as a later part?
Go ahead.
Thank you, I appreciate that. Again, I feel heartfelt by the councillors, and Councillor Gazzola being one of them, that was very concerned about the residents in my ward. And this motion speaks to some over 700 households that are having to be impacted with our works that are happening for the emerald ash borer mitigation process. So if the clerk could put this on to the, actually this, you'll have to do each page. It's quite clear that the plan for the EAB came forward early on.
Yeah, just been reminded we haven't been really following it that much, but try to stick to your 5 minutes, please.
Oh, it's clear that the process for the EAB mitigation work came to council early on, but I don't think it showed the impact to some residences, especially some entire streets. And I think these slides really speak to that impact and would be helpful for council to see the necessity of why this motion is coming forward. There are quite a few, so if you can go through all. So the items that are highlighted are the properties or boulevards where the trees would be cut. The red and the yellow are both identification of trees that would be cut in front of the boulevard. And as you can see, like some of the streets, like I think that's Terra Crescent, large majority of the trees on one side of that street are being cut.
Let's just have a clarification. The yellow or orange and then the red, what is the difference?
The yellow and the orange is just me highlighting the households that are being impacted. The markings, that's part of the report. The red and the yellow are trees that are being cut, and any that are green, you don't notice a lot of green because there aren't any. You see at the top of the page, those are trees that are being injected, so those are not cut. Only trees that are, the markings that are yellow and red are being cut.
Okay, I think we get the point.
Okay, all right. Well, there's quite a few more pages, but I appreciate that you do get the point that the impact to Ward 6 is quite significant, and all of this work is happening as part of 2004 work plan. In my consultation and discussion with staff, they've outlined that obviously, monies have been allocated for the stumping or replanting at all. and a priority does need to be given. So the reason why this motion is coming forward, there were monies that were allocated out of LEAF, so it's not new monies that I'm asking for. There were already $320,000 that was dedicated to mitigate the impact of the EAB, so the trees that are cut. My motion only speaks to prioritizing that immediate for Ward 4 and 6 of 2 wards that are most impacted. And I'm looking at Councillor Fernandez as I'm speaking to Ward 6, but Ward 4 is just as impacted, if not even more in some cases. So that is the reason for the motion, Mr. Mayor.
Okay. Councillor Gazzola.
I'm going to ask for this to be deferred so that we can get a report from staff and we can get a complete report as to what the situation is in the entire city. I'm not prepared to, I can appreciate what's being said here, but I can't deal with it until I see the importance, the priority of this, and I think we need to hear from staff. We have arborists on staff that have been dealing with this. Quite frankly, at this point, I don't know where we stand on that whole battle. I know when we first started talking, we were dealing with millions of dollars that we were going to have to spend. But we have not had any recent reports as to where we're at. What are we doing? And the fact that there's $320,000 in a pot somewhere, I mean, it's money. Maybe it's not new money, but it's still an expenditure. So, and I'm not saying that maybe in the fullness of time and before we had planned to do it, we may have to deal with it. But let's get some background. Let's not just come in on a Monday night and put forward a resolution to spend $320,000. I think we need to go through the process here.
Okay.
And so I'm deferring it.
Councillor Gazzola is asking for a deferral. I'm going to allow a little latitude on this one to set aside one of the protocols, and that is that would take preference and no other discussion could be had. But I too have some significant concerns about dealing with that this evening, but I will allow some of the discussion. But I would ask each member of council to not take your 5 minutes on this. Just make your points and let's move on. Try to keep it to about 2 minutes. Councillor Ioannidis.
I would ask for the deferral date be May the 12th. I will put the deferral date as May the 12th.
May the 12th, okay. Thank you.
That's a committee meeting.
And I'll come back to that, okay? So, Councillor Ioannidis.
Yeah, I just have a question to staff. What would be the implications of this motion put forward? Because I know Ward 7 has a significant amount of ash trees, and I have some concerns about other wards as well. How would this impact these other wards?
Ms. Houston, are you able to make a comment this evening?
I can make some comment at this point, and some will definitely have to come back for further details for sure. You'll recall that the original plan was to include all the removal of ash trees, and we've identified where all the ash trees are. We've made some progress in Ward 6 and at Ward 4. We've used our operations staff to do that work, so we've achieved some economies in doing that. But we have not had an opportunity to fully assess going forward whether there's any excess funds in the provision that was set aside for removal that could be rededicated to planting. So we wouldn't know whether we'd have funding available for replanting across the city, as you're asking about at this point in time. And we likely won't know that for some time, certainly, but not by May 12th. In terms of how we allocate the $320,000 that has been set aside for replanting, we're trying to assess that as well. That's something potentially we could have back for May the 12th. But the other component on the broader impact of replanting costs and whether we can fit that into existing budgets, that's going to take more time, I believe.
Okay, thanks. Through you, Mayor, can I make a comment?
Sure. Yeah, let's do them both at the same time, so let's move on to this.
I'm not too sure where I'm going to go with this, but I just want to make a point that if I can recall correctly during our budget deliberations, that I was very supportive of wanting to put more funding in the EAB, and I pretty well was pretty laughed at. And I remember calling the question that you will be hearing from your residents and you will be looking for the funding. And today, here it is. And that's why I questioned the $500,000 towards the debt. And that's my comment.
Councillor Glenn Graham.
Thank you very much. I'd like to see this come back to us with an outline of where the impacts are. I am supportive of this in principle. I do think we need to know exactly where this has affected our city as a whole, not just in two highly affected and devastated wards. So I am supportive of this, but I do think that there's benefit to getting it right and looking at this. It is the same bucket of money, so I don't have a problem with that, but I do think we need to understand the whole picture.
Councillor Galloway-Sealock.
Yeah, I was thinking right along the lines of Councillor Gazzola, which doesn't always happen, but I'm glad we're aligned tonight. I was going to suggest that I appreciate where Councillor Singh's coming from, but that we need to understand this in the full context of EAB. And we need to understand it in the full context of how it affects future years and the funding of future years. And also, I would like to understand that amount of money that we're talking about is $230,000. What progress will that actually make? I know it'll make some progress, but there is a lot of homes that are affected by the EAB and the removal of their trees. And I think, if I understand trees accordingly, that this is going to make a very small dent in the overall scheme of things. So I think, staff has come forward already with a way to try and attack the overall issue. And outside of allotting more budget money towards it, we're not going to be able to make that big of a dent in the problem in the near future. So I do really think that we need a report from staff outlining it. At the end of the day, if it makes more sense to go this way and start replanting, I won't have a problem supporting that, but I need to see the full context of things before I can make that decision.
Councillor Fernandez.
Thank you. As the first ward that was affected by this, it was really disturbing for many of my residents to see trees being taken out. And now it's a year later, and they have not heard about any stumping or replanting. Many of them have approached me to partner with the city. And I know that we have had that discussion. I believe that there was some comments made by Mr. Chapman about the viability at budget about giving tax receipts to residents. And I don't understand why we're not investigating that further. Here's a golden opportunity to partner with residents to get the stumping and replanting done. So the $320,000 that's been set aside could easily be doubled in value by getting the stumping done so that residents can start planting. That we can easily make up a list of trees that are acceptable and that will fill in rapidly, make sure that it's not a monoculture, which is what we've been struggling with. I want to be as brief as I possibly can, but I just feel like we've stalled. I've seen trees that are still 3 and 4 feet high that actually started to regrow last year. My understanding also is that this winter the temperatures may have slowed down the EAB. I've heard that from a number of arborists outside of this city. So I guess what I'm trying to say is let's move one area at a time instead of just going and denuding our entire city of ash trees. Why are we not finishing one project area and then moving to the next? I understand that makes other councillors in other wards feel like, well, what about me? But the reality is that the ash trees are dying, but they're dying slowly. We're not going to be seeing trees falling over tomorrow. It takes some time. So if we could move methodically through the process, partnering with residents to get new trees in place, I see it as definitely a win-win opportunity. So that's the reason why Councillor Singh brought this forward, and I don't know what the protocol is, but I had hoped to see Councillor Singh, Councillor Yvonne Fernandez motion on here, because we have been speaking about this for months and months and months. So I'm asking Council to take a look at that as an opportunity and a different approach to what maybe was originally presented by our staff.
Okay. I'm going to take new speakers first. Councillor Verbanovich.
Thank you very much, Mr. Mayor. I'm wondering if I can just ask a question, both of Councillor Singh and then one of Ms. Houston. Councillor Singh, from your perspective, what is the sensitivity around a deferral? Is there a reason why we can't defer this so that we have the benefit of all the information?
Thank you. I appreciate you asking that question, and I had already put in a request to speak further to it, and I was going to outline the specifics to your question. Primarily, the two resolutions that are part of my motion are quite different. The one that requests for allocation from funding from the overall cutting budget, and the one that we already prioritized $320,000 for mitigation work after the effect. The reason why it was more time sensitive, Councillor Verbanovich, is obviously replanting is seasonal sensitive, and in speaking with staff, that stumping can't just take effect on its own. Locates need to be done. That can take some time, additional couple weeks prior to stumping, and then replanting thereafter. So if we're looking at it later on in May and further, we're looking at possibly sometime in the summer, and again, that can affect the planting timelines. And that will affect as to how many households can be affected. And the last point is, the $320,000 is probably close to sufficient amount that could provide significant improvement to the trees that are already cut. Which has already been allocated. And I'll speak to the later points when I get the chance.
Ms. Houston, just from a timing perspective and a deferral perspective, what work, do you know what work is being done right now? If we sort of deferred this so that maybe an initial report potentially even came back next Monday, and I realize you'd have to get it out publicly, I guess, Friday or walk it in. Is that something that could be done so that we can have an initial conversation at committee then as to where we're at, and then possibly have a second one later on is around the date that Councillor Gazzola is talking about?
Ms. Houston.
Through you, Mr. Mayor, I know that staff are currently working on the tender for planting. So they're looking at what the costing would be. So we could bring something back with respect to that piece. I'm not sure for next Monday though. We need a little bit of time to gather that information, but certainly by the following committee meeting. I'm not sure what the date is on that.
Our dates for committees are April the 7th and 28th, with a council meeting on the 14th.
So if we deferred this to April the 28th, would that still allow enough time for us to deal with this in an educated way and still allow you enough time to proceed with any tenders and so on?
My understanding from staff is April 28th, we could certainly do that. If we're just dealing with the last clause and how we allocate the $320,000 for replanting and how many trees and what wards that would impact. If you're dealing with the other piece, the resolution higher up, that's the piece that I said would take more time.
The issue of tree stumping and replanting?
On a more broader scale and what the impact is in terms of what funding we have available in our plan already.
Okay, but you could at least do an initial look at that, I presume.
Only for Ward 4 and Ward 6.
And provide us with an update as to where we are with EAB, because like Councillor Fernandez, I too have read a number of articles and so on around the issue of this winter's temperatures and so on. So I think that merits some consideration in all this.
We can certainly comment on that as well. What we can't provide you is whether we have enough money to replant the entire city with the funding that's been set aside that was designated based on just removing trees. We don't think we can, but it's too soon to reassess our efficiencies that we've been able to gain on the work so far. So
Okay.
I'm not sure you want to change your mind about how you're prioritizing the work between continuing on to ensure we remove the trees versus reallocate to planning if you don't know whether you're going to have enough funding to complete the work as a whole project.
I'm reminded as well that we as chairs and mayor were reminded that April 28th is already a very long day in terms of the items that are on the agenda. So just
I appreciate that.
keep that
I
in
mean,
mind.
that's always...
But in terms of how we get the information, I think that we need to perhaps take this one in steps.
Yep, and that might be the first opportunity to do that. Thank you.
Councillor Yanetsky, on this item.
Yes, thank you. I was approached by Councillors Fernandez and Singh back last week on this concern that they had about in their wards about the EAB, and I sympathized with them. And then I think they're probably the ones that are most affected by this infestation. However, I didn't know the details of the resolution and wasn't certain exactly how it was going to be all unfolding and etc. But I appreciate the concern that they have in terms of trying to deal with their problem. I think based on the discussion that we've had here and response from staff and the request for a deferral, I'd be prepared to support the deferral because I think there's a lot of questions that need to be answered that have been raised here in terms of how do we do this, how much money is going to be allocated, where's the source going to come from, what the division will be amongst these two wards or other wards as well, the impact of tree planting and stump removing, how long it's going to take and cost. I think it's a bigger problem that needs to be addressed, and I really can't see it being done in terms of trying to address it tonight. I think it's jumping the gun, and I think there's more questions that are unanswered that I see need to be answered.
Okay, I have two speakers left. It's Councillor Singh and Councillor Gazzola. And so I'm going to go to Councillor Singh to make a final comment on this, and then go to Councillor Gazzola, who is bringing forward the deferral motion, probably for April the 28th. But you said May the 12th, I understand. But just in terms of taking this one step at a time, it may be the 28th, but for you to consider. Okay, Councillor Singh.
Thank you, and this is my comment for the deferral. And I asked Councillor Gazzola that if deferral is what he's proceeding with, because the intent of the two different resolutions in this motion are quite different, that you ask for deferral of each of them differently. I hear from the comments from staff that overall impact review does need to be done as to what the effects would be if allocation was done from the larger cutting budget for reprioritizing for replanting and stumping, but the facts are very clear. The $320,000 has already been established for stumping and replanting, and all this does is it reallocates specifically for Ward 6 and 4, where the work has already been done, the cutting. Not other wards, the cutting hasn't even initiated yet. I'm only speaking to the $320,000 for it to resolve to mitigate the effect that has already been implemented to those wards. And I think it's very clear that the $320,000 can have substantial improvement to the households that have had the trees cut on their boulevard. And some questions to staff, they have already outlined that I'm responding to a response from staff. Our forestry staff have been successful in removing the trees en masse in a very efficient manner, which appears to be significantly more cost effective. These savings may be able to be applied to fund stumping and replanting earlier. So we've already garnered some efficiencies, and highlighting it with additional $320,000 can have substantial improvement to both my ward and Councillor Fernandez's ward. So I ask at least these two items to be voted separately for deferral so that we can make a decision on it sooner, especially because we need to give direction to staff so that they can proceed with the work at least. If they're looking, and this is staff's comment, that they're already looking for tendering at this point.
Okay, I haven't actually made a comment yet, so before we go to the deferral. I would agree and support a deferral, and I think, though, that we need to have the full context of the entire program, because both of these items were dealt with at great length, and I understand what Councillor Singh is saying in terms of what has been cut already, but everyone would like to know, I believe, how it's going to affect the entire city before we start making a change of this major plan. So I'll go now to Councillor Gazzola for the deferral motion. Yes, you can. Councillor Gazzola.
Yeah, I'd prefer to deal them as one deferral. The issue goes.
Yeah, but they can any member of council can ask for it to be a motion to be divided.
Well, okay, and my deferral will be till May the 11th. I mean, you already said that April the 28th is going to be a heavy day as it is. I also can appreciate the severity of this program. I have 2 big ash trees in my backyard, which I had to spend considerable dollars to have them injected. I know the problem, but from where we started out on this whole issue was that we were going to deal first with the safety issues. We have to, if there's a tree that's going to fall over and so we need to deal with that. The nicety, and if money were no object, yes, let's do the stump and do all of that and replant it. Yes, that would be great, but we can live without that. I lived where I did for at least 15 years without a tree. I used to have to drive out to the country to take my children out to the country to see trees. We didn't have trees. They finally came. I don't want to make light of it. It's an issue that we're dealing with the safety issue. The other part we can live with. We need to see how everything fits together. I think we have to really reprioritize some of the things we're going to do. This has to have been one of the severest winters we've had in this community. I know I've been in this community for 50 years this year. It's the worst winter I've ever seen. And there's a lot of fallout from that, not even counting the severe storms, ice storms we had before the snow even came. So we're going to have to, I suspect, re-look at our priorities. So this is not the time to be coming to the table and committing things. I think by May the 11th we'll have Councillor Vrbanovic's already asked for some kind of an idea where we sit on the other issue. And by that time, we can also get a refresher report on where this whole EAB, where it's gone, how we knew at one time it was a $3, $4, $5, $6 million problem, but we haven't heard any up-to-date figures. We need to hear that before we go to 1 or 2 wards and start stumping trees. So I would ask that Council support the deferral to May the 11th, the 12th, May the 12th, at which point we can deal with the whole issue with all the information on the table. I know the issue, and we'll probably be able to support it at that time, but not now.
Okay, the motion is here for May the 12th, not May the 11th, deferring this item. And is there a seconder for the deferral? Councillor Glenn Gray. Okay, we'll now vote on the deferral. It's been requested to divide the motion, and we will do that. So this is the first operative clause at the bottom of the printed page that is in front of you, relating to item 117. So we're clear on that one? Everyone see that? Can I have some nodding of heads? Everyone got that? Okay. A recorded vote has been asked for. This is for the deferral. If you wish to have it deferred on item 1, you vote yes. Has everyone voted? The deferral passes. Item number 2. This is the last paragraph on that page related to clause 17. Deferral as well. can now vote. That passes. The first vote was a vote of 8-3. This is a vote of 6-5 on the deferral. So both deferrals are to May the 11th. Okay, we'll move on. I think that was all of I don't have any other speakers for new business, questions and answers. So it's been moved by Councillor Fernandez, seconded by Councillor Urbanovich, that the bylaws be read for a first time, but there is a late starter, I believe. Christine?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, we have two late starter bylaws relating to PSIC item number 2 for 820 Victoria Street. One is an official plan amendment bylaw. The second is zoning bylaw.
Those in favor? Bylaws? Opposed? That is carried. And it's moved by Councillor Galloway-Sealock that the Council resolve itself in the Committee of the Whole. All in favor? Opposed? That is carried. Councillor Galloway-Sealock.
Yes, can I have someone move the second reading of the bylaw? Moved by Councillor Fernandez. All in favor? Opposed? That's carried. We will move, tenders have been completed. We'll move to number 2, which is the application for cancellation, refund, reduction of taxes. Someone want to move that? Moved by Councillor Ioannidis. Are there any questions? All in favor? Opposed? That's carried. Number 3 is an encroachment agreement for 83 King Street West. Does someone want to move that? Councillor Ioannidis. Are there any questions? Okay. All in favor? Opposed? That's carried. Next is a license agreement for the regional electrical conduit on 85 Queen Street North. Moved by Councillor Glenn Graham. Are there any questions? All in favor? Opposed? That's carried. Number 5 is the 2014. That probably should 2013. But this statement of remuneration expenses is just for information. Perfect. We don't. There is some questions, comments. Councillor Etherington.
Yeah, it's mostly comments. On this annual statement of council's remuneration for 2013, I would point out that council has spent almost $50,000 attending conferences so far in this 4-year term, and we've spent about $136,000 on similar conferences during the entire term. Now, while I appreciate the learning potential of conferences and the fact that each councillor can attend 3 conferences a year, speaking for myself, I cannot justify this kind of ongoing spending. Until now, I have avoided using names, but in light of the fact that nothing changes, I intend to go further tonight because I'm sick and tired of making efforts to save money for the city and watching other people soak that money up and spend it. Looking at the top 2 council spenders, I cannot accept that Councillor Yanetsky spent this year, in 2013 spent $8,558 attending conferences in Chicago, Ottawa, and Vancouver, while Councillor Ioannidis spent more than $7,000 attending similar events in California, Chicago, and Vancouver. Now, hopefully, the one bright part of this is that Councillor Davies passed motion to set an annual 4-year spending limit for each councillor will next term help address that fact, address the fact that while some councillors exercise restraint, Others spend much more than their share of council's annual conference budget. That change in policy would mean that each councillor has about $14,800 to spend on conferences per 4-year term, or $3,700 each year, which means that Councillor Yanetsky would have been about $5,000 over his limit so far this term, because during the 4-year term, he spent about $20,000 on conferences in the past 3 years. Councillor Ioannidis would have spent about $3,100 over his share of the conference budget, because so far this term, he has spent $17,947 on conferences. As I said, I was reluctant to do this, but it really troubles me. I'm also troubled by some councillors' ongoing use of free tickets and passes. I won't get into the detail on that because, well, I won't. Because I don't think taxpayers can afford or would be willing to accept such spending. Noted in this statement of remuneration, I plan to bring a future motion to Council, just serving notice of that will once again attempt to scrutinise spending on conferences, home tech expenses, as well as these tickets and passes. Now, hopefully, in this election year, I'll get more council support for these reductions than I have received so far this term. Thank you very much.
Okay. That's okay. Councillor Davey.
Thank you. I would echo many of Councillor Etherington's comments, and I look forward to discussing how we can better look at technology expenses as well. This has been a personal issue for me. I think it's one of those lead by example areas, and on the opposite side of the spectrum, I think we should probably acknowledge the councillors that have actually been fairly fiscally restrained. I, of course, again, I pay very close attention. I've been the lowest spending councillor, but I'd also like to point out Councillor Galloway-Seelock over the taking everything into account, taking conferences, tickets and expenses, mileage, everything. Councillor Galloway-Seelock is also the second lowest spending councillor, and Councillor Etherington was the third. So I think it's important to point that out as well.
Councillor Ioannidis.
You know, I'm just a little amazed at some of the comments that came out of Councillor Etherington. You know, if you really want to get nitpicky, why don't we look at your mileage? Like, you're a downtown councillor, and you have one of the highest mileages. Why don't you take a look in the mirror? And you know what? I'm not going to apologize for wanting to better myself. And on top. Well, it's not accurate.
One person's going to speak at a time. Okay, if there's a point of order called, that's fine. But there has been, this is obviously a hot button issue because it is about our own expenses. I've allowed the latitude of Councillor Etherington to use names to make his point. They were against Councillor Ioannidis. So if he's going to respond back to that, I'm going to allow it. I would ask everyone who is going to speak to do it in a respectful manner, and we can continue this discussion, or I can just close it off and we can move forward. So with that, are you finished, Councillor Ioannidis?
No, I'm not finished.
Okay.
No, I'm not finished.
So let's do this with a respectful manner, and you can defend yourself.
I was just wanted to make that point because it's an obvious glaring point. But I can also say through my initiatives going on conferences, I have shown some leadership to the city in the sense that I did help bring a startup here to this community. And I don't see that coming out of Councillor Etherington.
Councillor Yanetsky.
Yeah, thank you. In light of the comments from Councillor Etherington, I have to echo what Councillor Ioannidis has basically stated as well. I also wish to point out that the benefit of going to these conferences is a learning experience, and having gone to 2 planning conferences, which is what my background is all about, I find them of a huge benefit because this is the background I can provide to council here with that career that it basically entailed as well. I'd like to also point out that Councillor Scott Davey and Frank Etherington both sit on the Hydro Board, and they get remunerated almost $10,000 of taxpayers' money. And to them, it's probably a learning experience as well, which they've spent more than I have. So.
Okay, there's no further speakers on that issue, so we will close the Committee of the Whole because I do not believe there are any additional items. And I'll just read this one. It's moved by myself and seconded by Councillor Davey that the proceedings in the recorded pecuniary interests and conflicts taken in the meeting of the Committee of the Whole held this date as attached hereto and forming part of these minutes are hereby adopted and confirmed.
All in favour? Opposed? That's carried. And it's moved by Councillor Fernandez, seconded by Councillor Urbanovich, that the bylaws be given third reading. All in favour? Opposed? That's carried. And it's moved by Councillor Galloway-Sealock that we adjourn.